lack of dental care for our senior citizens.
Right.
And there, all of a sudden, I met one of your compatriots, Glenn, and when he said you had this business model, I was excited because I know it's needed. I lived this.
Yes.
So how does this, do you recruit other dentists to come and get the same dose of joy you get?
Exactly. Yeah.
Really?
We have we have assistants and other dentists. We even work with like a house call hygienist. That's they call them extended function, so they can go in without the dentist and actually do cleanings. So but we do a lot of education, whether it's of the patient, the family, or the facility.
Great. Well, recently, just speaking of that, we visited an assisted living facility where professional dental caregivers visited one of their regular patients. Now, Kevin, if you could describe what we're seeing here, well, first the facility, obviously.
Right. That's Dr. Desai and Diana, one of the assistants, and our dentist walking in. That's a typical room. We can do the work while they're in the wheelchair. Oftentimes they're in bed or in an easy chair, a recliner.
Right. Now, this particular patient presented some challenges because of her difficulty in hearing.
Right. So we know how to work with the patient. We work slowly. If the patient needs us to write things down, but you can see she's opening and cooperating fully, so she knows what's going on. You're not going to do that unless you feel comfortable with the people.
Well, even with Alzheimer's, you're still apt to remember going to the dentist at age 12.
They do. Everyone does remember that. When I put my coat on, they help. Yes, they help with the work.
It's remarkable. And of course, many other things come to light, as you mentioned earlier during an examination that is this close and personal.
Right. The person, you have to feel comfortable with someone who's in your mouth. I mean, that's why people keep their dentist for so many years.
Tell me about this equipment. It looks rather traditional, and yet it's compact.
It's basically one dental operatory that was developed for the military, and there's compressor, suction, water, all in one unit. We have an X-ray unit that looks like a radar gun that the police use, but it's basically, like I say, it's one operatory that we can bring to you. You don't have to come to the operatory.
Now, I would imagine that we were wired up, so you have things in the computer, and you can come back and visit a patient and let the caregivers know that it's time to come again. Look at this kit.
Yeah.
This is such a compact kit. That is fabulous. I'm so impressed. What did the military do to downsize these things? I mean, I can remember big X-ray machines and stuff.
Basically, I think it was after the military. The military, they can spend more money and use a bigger equipment. But there are probably 40 or 50 companies that sell portable equipment of different types, from compressors to X-ray units, and they downsize it, mostly with changes in computers and electronics.
Right. Now, there are certain things. We can't pretend like this is a full-on dental office. There are a couple of procedures that would be very difficult to do in a patient's home.
Right.
What would they be?
Root canals and extractions. We do some extractions, but the root canals, you have to take a lot of X-rays, and typically one other thing that happens when we get older is the nerve shrinks. So quite often there's no nerve to really clean out, even if the patient's having a toothache.
Wow, I didn't realize
that.
that.
Send the patient to the specialist.
I mean, I know about getting shorter, but I didn't know that.
Well, some people don't even want anesthetic because they don't feel the work. Like as you drill in to do a small filling, they don't feel anything because the nerve is gone.
Wow, I'll be darned. That's fascinating. Well, what about anesthetics? Can you bring anesthesia along as well if the procedure calls for it?
Correct. We have topical anesthetic and the regular injectable anesthetic.
Wow.
If needed, say for a crown, or obviously when we do an extraction, you need a lot of anesthetic.
Wow. I just can't get over how pleased I am that you're here and that this idea exists. Now, how do people get in touch with home care dentists?
Well, we have a website, and that's homecaredentist.com.
Okay.
And also our 800 number is 800-382-3938. And you can send in a request via the website also.
Wow, that's good. That's good. But and you do cover Southern California.
Oh,
right?
yes.
This is not only Orange County and San Diego County, but Los Angeles County.
Yes, we do come to Los Angeles County. Yeah.
Well, I can just see caregivers right now scrambling for a pencil. So let's repeat this again. The telephone number again, please.
It's 800-382-3938.
Okay, and the website is Home Care Dentists, that's plural, right?
Yes.
And .com.
Yes.
I know that there are caregivers out there sitting there going, I've got to do something about my mom's breath. Right. I know she's been having trouble chewing. So pick up the phone, get some information about this. Now, how do you bring all of this equipment to, I mean, do you come like in a bus or something?
Well, you know, the competition I saw years and years ago was a motorhome. You know, but the patient would still have to go to the motorhome. So I decided to get a small car. This time, now we're using Honda Elements. All the equipment is put in the back, and we just offload whatever we need for that patient. It might be just one box. It might be half the van. And so we bring it into the patient's room, or say an office. Some facilities have medical offices or dental offices in the facility.
Well, I said the design, though, for me, of the business is so elegant. We ask our seniors to stay in their home longer. It's better for them, more cost-effective. And here's a service that can come directly to you.
Right.
It's such a wonderful idea. Now, what about, can you visit major facilities where there are several seniors?
Yes. I mean, that's the ideal for us, is to go to a large facility, maybe an assisted living that has 100 people, and then we go in and do 4 or 5 people each visit.
Right.
We try to go back every week to each building that we go to.
And it gives you a chance to educate the staff, doesn't
Exactly. Because that's the biggest thing. No matter what we do, if the patient's going to forget how to take care of themselves, the staff has to know. So we try to introduce everyone to the proper oral care for this population.
It's really, it's important what you're doing. Again, homecaredentist.com. It's time for a short break. When we return, we will continue our discussion of home dentists with Dr. Kevin Worthen. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
In the aftermath of a disaster, you may not be able to rely on your knowledge of your home. You might also not be able to rely on your guide dog. The dog may be injured, frightened, confused, panicky. Be prepared to calm your dog and to keep it confined and securely leashed and or harnessed. For additional information, please contact the Department on Disability or the Emergency Management Department by calling the numbers on the screen or by dialing 311.
As kids, it's really important that we learn the proper way to cross the street. First, you have to stop at the curb, then look both ways to make sure there are no cars. If you see one, wait for it to pass, and when it's clear, you can cross. As kids, sometimes you have to set an example. Look both ways before you cross. Cars can't see you.
Welcome back to Aging in LA. Our topic today, home care dentists. Please welcome our guest once again, Dr. Kevin Worthen, who has pioneered the idea of dentists visiting senior citizens at home. It's such a remarkably simple idea. You must sometimes feel like somebody gave you a tap on the shoulder and said, "This is yours, buddy."
Exactly. You know, one thing I think I mentioned to you earlier, that when people go to the dentist, a lot of times the first thing they say is, "Oh, I hate the dentist." Nothing personal.
Yeah.
But you know, I really got a lot out of working with people that wanted to see me. You know, they're like, "Thank you for coming." You know?
I'm sure. And for some patients, especially elderly patients, they don't want to be burdensome. They don't want to put their caregiver to a bother. So maybe they haven't disclosed fully. And your visit may be their first opportunity to say, by the way,
Exactly.
even if it's to report abuse.
Well, exactly. You know, and I guess, well, not I guess, but obviously a lack of providing oral care, it can be considered abuse. You know, that you're not helping the patient have the best health.
Well, oftentimes, I'm sure, just speaking on behalf of caregivers, and I am one, that's kind of the last thing you think about.
Right.
You know, you worry about whether the food gets to the mouth and sort of the personal hygiene aspects of things. But I remember how startled I was that Auntie Ruth, who prided herself on her wonderful teeth, all of a sudden was losing them, and I thought, I failed some here. I should have known better. Yeah. So what's a caregiver to do? What are some of the signs they should look for, assuming the staff hasn't picked it up?
Well, initially the staff, you know, we like all facilities to do an exam when the patient goes in, just to find these things. But for a caregiver or a family member, staff member, if the patient's not eating as well, their dentures are clicking and clacking, you know, even if someone who has dementia or some mental disorder, they become more belligerent.
Right.
They're more vocal. or just not eating like they used to. I mean, those are all signs that there could be something going on in the mouth.
Well, they could have a pain in their mouth for that
Exactly.
matter. And you look, it drives animals crazy. It drives us crazy.
Right.
If we had
Right.
persistent and grinding pain. So now, but how would a caregiver? Well, what if you think it's staff inattention? Is this something that you sit down with the facility director and say, "Look, let's talk about this for a minute"?
Yeah, we do lectures on oral care, how to provide oral care for people. You know, we'll go in and do a lecture with a PowerPoint, have all the staff members there, and then when we go in for each visit, we talk to whoever takes care of that one patient and let them know this is what you're not doing and this is what you should be doing.
Right. Are you able to do that in visiting a home as well? I mean,
Yeah.
leave off like a checklist or a
Yes.
brochure or something?
Yeah, we have informational forms that we give out. Our website has all the information and more that we would tell someone in person. But they can always reach us also if they have questions.
Right, and we gave out that 800 number, and I hope you guys all copied it down. I'm going to repeat it one more time. Once again, the 800 number is
800-382-3938.
Okay, that's the number. Of course, the funding and the money is always going to be an issue here. And the fact is the insurance industry and health care generally is lagging way behind in this. What is there adequate compensation for this kind of care, or is this going to come out of somebody's pocket?
You know, unfortunately, it does come out of their own pocket. There are provisions made. There's a company called Care Credit that the patient actually pays Care Credit as if it's a credit card.
I see.
And it's a health care only card for medical, dental, veterinary even.
Right.
And so that's, a lot of our patients use that type of system to pay us. Our fees are comparable to a fixed office, but if the patient can't afford a fixed office, then they can't afford any dental care.
Exactly, and this provides at least that alternative because, and I would appreciate the fact that there can be additional expenses here for being mobile, but gosh, the return on this, just for quality of life, peace of mind, this is important. But you mentioned to me earlier about taking care of someone in their backyard so they could brag about having their dentist at home.
Exactly. We can go anywhere. And this person was one of my first patients, and he wanted his crown done in his backyard. So, but we prefer, in the house.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of what kind of changes would we have to make to our state-run insurance system to accommodate these, what are increasingly necessary home visits by qualified dentists? What would we have to change?
Unfortunately, the biggest problem is funding. There are programs in all states that provide for dental services, but usually they reimburse so low that even in an office, they don't pay for the procedure.
Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't take into account, forget the years of training that you had to go through to become a dentist, but this cannot be inexpensive to equip a Honda Element with the tools that you would need on these visits.
Correct. And one thing people don't consider, I didn't consider at first, is that things expire more rapidly when you're driving around in a car and it gets 120 degrees inside.
Yes.
So we go through more supplies and
Sure.
more equipment and a gas cost, of course.
Right, well, yeah, that was a pretty dramatic blow for everybody in America. It's like, because I remember 25-cent gas, and $4.50 was what?
Yes,
It's
yes.
startling. Well, that's another area to deal with. But is there anybody pushing legislation on a state or national level that can include services like yours?
Truthfully, I have not heard of anyone who's doing that. And I think I've thought of it, but I don't have the background to know how to approach someone.
Well, I can say with some authority that I have actually passed more laws than our next president. So, but this is something that should be done.
Right.
Especially in our mobile society. You tell me, working in Las Vegas, it's the same sort of spread out, ever-growing population base. It's hard to chase them down.
Yes. And one thing you were talking about, insurance companies. And in fact, some insurance companies now are offering extra cleanings for people who have certain diseases. Well, not always diseases, but pregnant women, for instance, that there are more low birth weight and preterm babies delivered. They found that if you do extra cleanings, that insurance companies actually save money. They don't have to care for a preemie. Now, with the elderly or anyone who's not an infant, diabetes is one of the biggest connections. It's, with periodontal disease and diabetes control, it's back and forth. You lose bone when you have bad diabetes,
of course,
but also you can't control your blood sugar level if you have bad periodontal disease. So they're offering extra cleaning, some of them, for people with diabetes.
And in the end, it's a cost-saving measure.
Exactly.
Well, I often wonder about that. It's funny, we run our lives and we teach our children, to take care and exercise a little bit of caution, because the consequences of not doing so are so grave that you learn this lesson. And yet here we are, we've got these big systems that they're penny wise and pound foolish.
Exactly.
And I can see where you could actually get a team of people. Now, you mentioned a motorhome where they have to come out, but how about, coming to a rather large facility with several dentists and get it all in one fell swoop?
Exactly. And a lot of facilities are being proactive in putting a medical, physician's office in their facility.
Right, and that's smart to do. You know it's going to be used. Know it's going to be used. Well, what about rural America? How far out? Is there a mileage charge? Is there a distance thing? Have you encountered that?
For us, our headquarters is in Orange County, so that's where all the bands start in California, and of course, as you mentioned, I'm in Las Vegas area. So if the further we have to go, the further it takes us from our other patients.
Right.
So we do have not a set fee, but we do have to charge a little extra for distance.
And it makes sense. It makes sense to do it. Gosh, I wish this was a national service you could do like FedEx, headquartered in Atlanta, but we'll be anywhere.
Right.
That would be great. Now, you mentioned that people can go online and actually make appointments for this service?
They can contact us, and we're working on the actual appointments, and obviously there's a lot of information we need before we work on someone.
Certainly, of course.
And I look at the patients that I work on that I know more about them than when I worked in a fixed office, because they have medical charts, they've been to the hospital, they have the family members, they have their own memory. So we get a lot of information before that first visit, and so we can't just like that go out until we get enough information.
But that makes sense. That's professional quality care. And I just know there are caregivers out there right now saying, thank God we heard about this. Unfortunately, our time is up for today's Aging in LA. Our sincere thanks to Dr. Kevin Worthen, who came up with the idea of, get this, having dentists visit their senior patients in their own homes. Thank you so much, Dr. Worthen. And now, it is time for today's Senior Stat Shots. And again, we found today's statistics in the recently released LA County Seniors Count, a survey of the older adult population in Los Angeles City and County. Today's statistics reflect the health needs of senior citizens in Los Angeles County. When it comes to insurance, 61% of seniors do not have dental insurance. 14% do not have medical insurance or an HMO. 47% of LA County seniors do not have prescription drug insurance. When it comes to affordability, 9% of the senior population needs but is not able to afford medical care. 18% need but cannot afford dental care. 9% of the seniors in LA County need but cannot afford prescription drugs. 13% of our seniors need but are not able to afford vision care, such as glasses or cataract surgery. And 11% are not able to afford hearing care, like hearing aids or implants. And thinking about seniors in Los Angeles County, having prevention services, 31% of the senior population has not had a dental exam in the last 3 years. 33% have not had a flu shot in the last year. 51% of our citizens over 65 have not had a pneumonia shot in the last 10 years. And 22% of LA County seniors have not had a physical exam in the last 3 years. My friends, these are shameful statistics. We're going to have to do something about this, because the cost will be extraordinary if we don't get a handle on it. And that's today's Senior Stat Shots and my opinion. Now, you can get your own copy of this fact-filled survey Simply go online to www.ladcss.org, which is Los Angeles County Community and Senior Services. Click on LA County Seniors Count, and the full report will appear. Or you can have a copy sent to you by calling 213-738-2065. That's 213-738-2065. I'm Paul Peterson, and for the Los Angeles Department of Aging, the people here at City View Channel 35, and all of our guests on Aging in LA, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
City View Channel 35. Your city, your channel.
morning, and thank you to Councilmember Perez, Terry, Smith, Weston, tonight. Not expecting Mr. Carpus today, and these are going on 10:30. Other than that, Mr. Smith is excused as well. Nobody's here. So, Mr. Alarcon, Ms. Hahn, Mr. Krikorian, Mr. Labange, Mr. Parks, Mr. Reyes, and Mr. Rosendahl, if you'll please make your way down as soon as possible so we can begin the meeting. And thank you, everybody, for your patience and patience. Good morning, Los Angeles, and welcome to the City Council meeting for Tuesday, July 20th, 2010. We're here in the John Farrar Council Chambers, room 340 of City Hall, where we meet every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m. I want to welcome members of the public who are here today in Council Chambers, as well as those who are joining us in our remote facilities in San Pedro and Van Nuys, which are available for your convenience if you live closer to those locations at our City Halls there. We also are available three other means: through television, through our city's cable system on CityView, which is channel 35 throughout the city's cable systems, and also through the internet at our city's homepage at lacity.org, where there's also a wealth of information about city departments and city services to improve the quality of your life here in Los Angeles. We also have available online all of the agendas for these meetings, which are also available in person 72 hours in advance or 24 hours in advance for our special meetings. Finally, you can use your telephone if you're not close to a computer or a television and call in the following number, 213-621-CITY. That's 213-621-CITY. And that will allow you to listen in through council phone to any of our council meetings as well as our committee meetings. We also archive our past council meetings online, our audio and video portions of that, and past agendas so that you can track legislation that matters to you and that is of interest to your communities throughout Los Angeles. It is after 10 o'clock. It is 10:10. This meeting is called for 10 o'clock, and pursuant to council rules, all members should be here in their seats at the beginning of the meeting. I want to thank those members who are here on time: Council Members Koretz, Parks, Perry, Smith, Wesson, and Zine. We are awaiting the following late council members: Councilmember Alarcon, Councilmember Hahn, Councilmember Krikorian, Councilmember Labange, Councilmember Reyes, and Councilmember Rosendahl. Mr. Huizar is excused to arrive late, and Mr. Cardenas is excused for today's meeting. So we can please ask those members to come down. We are awaiting them. If we fail to reach a quorum, 10:15 we'll cancel the meeting for lack of a quorum. So I urge those members to make their way down as soon as possible so we can begin our meeting, and out of respect for the public that has made time in their day to be here as well. Thank you. please call the roll.
Alarcon, Cardenas, Hahn, Weezer, Koretz, Krikorian, Labange, Parks, Perry, Reyes, Rosendahl, Smith, Weston, Zine, Garcetti. 10 members present and a quorum, Mr. President.
First order of business, please.
Approval of the minutes.
All right, Mr. Smith moves and Mr. Krikorian seconds. Without objection, those will be approved. Next order of business.
Commendatory resolutions for approval.
All right, Mr. Alarcon moves and Mr. Koretz seconds. Without objection, those will be approved as well. If we can go to the next order of business.
Mr. President, this is Tuesday, and it's time for the flag salute.
If I can ask everybody in council chambers to please rise for our Pledge of Allegiance. And Ms. Perry, would you be kind enough to lead us today?
Right hand over your heart and begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perry. If we can please run through the agenda. Colleagues, if I can direct your attention to the agenda for items before us today.
Mr. President, before beginning the regular agenda, there's been a request to continue a few items. On items 9 and 21, there is a request to continue that matter 1 week to July 27th.
Okay. There's no objection. We'll continue both of those till the 27th.
And on item 15, there's a request to continue that matter 2 weeks to August 3rd.
Okay. Without objection, we'll continue that as well. Sorry, Ms. Okay,
On
yeah.
the regular agenda, items 1 through 4 are street lighting ordinances notice for public hearing. Council should have 12 members today. Do you wish to hold those?
Yes, we're still waiting Mr. Labange and Ms. Hahn. When one of them arrives, we'll have 12 members, so let's hold that on the table till one of them arrives. If we can ask Ms. Hahn and Mr. Labange to please join us as soon as possible. Next item, so we go to the next section. Do you want to call one of those special, Mr. Kretz? Okay, hold up. Next items?
Items 5 through 16 are items for which public hearings have been held.
Okay. Mr. Kretz?
I'd like to call item 16 special and call item 8 special for Ms. Hahn.
Okay. Sure. So there's been a request to take 16 out of order first before public comment, and then we'll come to public comment right after that. Item 8 for Ms. Hahn and Mr. Krikorian.
Mr. President, I'd like to call number 5 and number 6 special for Mr. Labange.
Okay. We'll call 5 and 6 special for Mr. Labange. Other specials, colleagues? If there are no other specials, we've had the public hearings on these items, so please prepare the roll on the balance and tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
Did we hold 13? I'm sorry. There was an ordinance. Okay, if we can reconsider 13, please open the roll on that. Close the roll and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
We have Mr. Labange here now. If we can take up 13 and 1 through 4. Please prepare the roll and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
Okay, those are approved. If we can send 13 forthwith, please, without objection. Next items.
Items 17 through 27 are items for which public hearings have not been held. 10 votes are required for consideration.
Okay, if there's no objection, those are now considered before us. Mr. Parks.
Mr. President, may I have number 25 special, but also have it out of order? We have some police personnel and family members here.
Okay. 25 special for Mr. Parks. Do we have cards on any of these?
Yes, Mr. President, you have cards on item 18, 20, and 23.
23? Okay. Call those special. We'll open and close the other public hearings. If there's no other specials, let's take up the balance, please. Open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
13 ayes.
Okay, those are approved. If we can, Ms. Perry, you asked for 16 out of order. Can we take 25 first, this reward motion? Okay. I'd like to recognize Mr. Parks on item number 25.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd ask Detective Render, Jimmy Render, to come up along with Detective Sandra Smith and the Jones family, Francis Kenneth, the mother, and Chantel Jones, the niece. Colleagues, we have a reward motion today in which a victim, Tyrone Jones, who is handicapped, was a victim of a hit and run, and we have a reward. We're going to ask Detective Render to give us the overview of the case, and then Mr. Jones's mom is here to make a personal plea.
Council. Good morning, City Council. I'm Detective Jimmy Render, assigned to LAPD South Traffic Division. Here with me is Detective Sandra Smith, Ms. Kenneth, On June 26, approximately 10:30 p.m., Mr. Tyrone Jones and his young niece were attempting to cross the street in a crosswalk on 92nd Street at Broadway, during which time a motorist that was traveling southbound Broadway failed to yield for Mr. Jones and subsequently struck Mr. Jones as he was attempting to cross the street. The motorist then abandoned his vehicle and fled the scene without identifying himself or rendering aid. We're looking for the help from the public to provide some assistance in locating the responsible motorist that was responsible for this incident. Through our investigation, we were unable to identify the motorist, though we do have the vehicle in custody. The vehicle is a Chevy Lumina, green in color. The registered owner addressed the location. It was a bad location, so we're unable to identify the registered owner of the vehicle. I have a telephone number for individuals to provide for witnesses who may have additional information. I have an 800 number, which is 1-877-LAPD 24/7. And I also have a number that goes directly to our office, which is 323-290-6067.
Okay. Could you give that description of the vehicle again?
The vehicle is a green Chevy Lumina, and the year of that vehicle was... It's a 92 Chevy Lumina, bluish green, with a license plate number of 6 Charles Ocean William 072, and that's a California license plate.
And that vehicle's in custody, but anyone that's aware of who might have been a prior driver is somebody that we're asking to come forward.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now we'd like Ms. Francis Kenneth, if you could come in and up and make a couple of comments, we'd appreciate it. Ms. Kenneth is the mother of the victim, Tyrone Jones.
Hi, my name is Francis Kenneth. My son's name was Tyrone Jones, and the person who did it, I wish they would please turn themselves in, because they don't know. They put a jump on my life. And I can't wake up with my son every morning no more. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just have to take one day at a time. Would they please turn themselves in?
Colleagues, again, Mr. Jones was a handicapped pedestrian crossing the street at Broadway and 92nd Street, in which a vehicle failed to yield, struck him. He died as a result of those injuries. We'd ask the public's assistance. Anyone having information, contact Detective Rinder or Smith at 323-290-6063. And we'd ask for a vote, a yes vote on the $50,000 reward motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parks. Let's go ahead and please open the roll on the vote for this reward motion. Please close the roll and tabulate the vote.
13 ayes.
And we'll say that is approved. We'll send that forthwith, ma'am, and we're so sorry for your loss. And thank you very much for being here as well. Thank you to the detectives as well. We will turn to item 16. That was requested out of order. We have two committee chairs, Ms. Perry and Mr. Koretz, who both will be recognized first. Go ahead, Ms. Perry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. We are here for reasons I think we are all quite familiar, but just to recount, when the Department of Water and Power withheld the $73 million transfer to the general fund, it initiated a process which led to a very rancorous breakdown between the department and the Los Angeles City Council, and it is my opinion that delaying the $73 million transfers resulted in increased costs to the city in borrowing money, wasted a number of resources, and wasted a lot of everyone's time. The purpose of bringing this conversation or discussion here today out of committee to full council is to address why the transfer was withheld, and to use whatever information we can get from those represented here today to ensure that this does not happen again in the future. And I am a firm believer that this only gives momentum to the campaign for next spring to put the ratepayer advocate, inspector general, to reconfigure the way that commissioners are appointed to the Department of Water and Power Commission, and the whole panoply of choices which should change behavior of the department in a ongoing way. A whole series of events that took place made it even more apparent that the city does need greater transparency from the Department of Water and Power, particularly as it relates to revenue and rates. So we're going to continue to push forward on those matters. Now, we debated this item in committee, and there's various accounts as to why people were sent to this last committee, and I don't know that I want to waste too much time on that anymore. Over the past month, but I want to resolve this issue so that we can avoid future discrepancies involving the transfer. Now, on my behalf, as chair of the committee, we forwarded this to council without a recommendation. Mr. Koretz is chair of audits and government efficiency. He has another perspective. But as we move forward today, colleagues, I urge you to keep focused on moving ahead, making improvements in the areas of operation and open communication between the council and the Department of Water and Power. And Mr. President, I don't know if you want Mr. Koretz to speak first before we have speakers come to the table, or how do you
Well,
want
both as chairs, you both get 6 minutes to open, and then we can invite whoever forward.
I'll press my button again.
Okay, you have 3 more minutes. It was on 3 minutes if you want.
All right, great. Well, when Mr. Koretz is done, I would like for the Department of Water and Power to come forward to the table, and Mr. Buettner is here. Mr. Freeman is here, so you have an immediate past perspective, a future perspective. Mr. Raj is here. They're all very knowledgeable. Oh, and Mr. Alpert is here too, as head of the commission. And so, again, Mr. Buettner, Mr. Freeman, Mr. Alpert, and Mr. Raj, I think that they should all be asked to come to the table, as I think they're all very key figures in reconstructing and deconstructing what has taken place and how we can avoid that in the future.
And I know the controller's here, so we may start with her presenting report. Mr. Koretz, why don't you also give your framing comments, and then we'll hear from Ms. Gruhl, and then we'll invite the others to the table as well. Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Mr. President. We had a couple of hearings on this matter. At each one, we had asked the DWP to send representatives to answer questions. At the first one, no one was present. At the second one, we had a representative who basically told us they couldn't answer any questions. So we're here where we are with everybody present. The real question was, how was this done? And was this intentionally deceptive, as one could conclude after hearing the controller's report and the consultants? And if so, what have the responses been? Who is going to be disciplined as a result of this? We asked the city attorney to look into whether the deception that went on rose to the level of warranting criminal charges. And we also found that, based on the audit and the discussion, that it appeared that they abused their ability to advise us on bonds. And so we have suggested that we look elsewhere for bond-related advice and whether or not that can be done. We're looking to get to the bottom of this, how this decision was made, why it was made, why the DWP chose to deceive the City Council, and I'm hoping at the end of the day we have the answers to all that. I'd like to have us begin that discussion and hear from the City Controller and the consultants, and then finally hear from the DWP and see what their defense is to these charges.
Great, thank you. Madam Controller, why don't you come forward and Very much enjoy hearing your presentation on the items before us, and then we will go to speakers from the council. Thank you for being here. Good to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here. Good morning. Good morning. I have with me, so they're making their way up here, representatives from Crow-Horwath that are with me, and I will be brief, colleagues, because we really do want to get to the details. So thank you, council members, and thank you for hearing my review of the Department and Water and Power this morning. As you know, I commissioned a report in April of this year to provide an independent assessment of the DWP's rationale for not transferring the anticipated $73.5 million of the Power Revenue funds. We hired a team of experts who have analyzed numerous public utilities to examine statements made by the Department of Water and Power to determine whether or not the department had the money to transfer to the City of Los Angeles. The auditor's report that I know you have had before you since June 10th was clear that none of the reasons given by the Department of Water and Power factually supported its decision to refuse to make the transfer. That the DWP had the $73.5 million available to transfer for the city and could have done so without putting itself in any financial jeopardy. Additionally, we found that the DWP could have made the $73.5 million transfer without requiring an ECAF cap increase for this transfer. 3 central findings were in our report, which the auditors will give you further information on. But that the DWP did have a financial projection, documents that were provided to Crow-Horwath without an ECAF increase, and their own numbers showed that they would be able to transfer to meet their targeted financial goals even after completing a full power revenue transfer to the city. The DWP maintained that it needed to maintain its bond rating for an upcoming $1.21 billion bond sale. The review that we did is clear that the transfer itself was unlikely to impact its bond rating at all. The DWP needed to sell these bonds to backfill funds to support its practice of using operating expense revenue to pay for capital expenses. This dangerous policy, we believe, in the report outlines it, put the DWP at far greater risk than transferring the $73.5 million to the City of Los Angeles. By making certain assumptions and choosing to present them as hard facts, the DWP unnecessarily plunged the City of Los Angeles farther into a fiscal crisis, which contributed to a downgrading of the city by bond rating agencies. We released our report on June 10th. I was handed, as I walked in the room today, a copy of their response to that June 10th report. And, of course, our auditors that are here have not had the opportunity to fully review that document. Clearly, as I outlined in my letter, there needs to be greater transparency and accountability at the Department of Water and Power. DWP has lost the public's trust and its city partners, and it really will require dramatic steps to overcome this in the coming months and years to rebuild that confidence of our ratepayers. Most of all, I've been asked several times, why did you do this review? They ultimately sent the money. For me, when we began this review, it was about whether or not, number one, we were going to get the money, and number two, whether or not we would ever be put in this position again. We were in the 4th quarter of our fiscal year. We were facing a huge deficit, and we wanted them to come to yes rather than no. And what we found is that they decided not to transfer that money at that time, and it did plunge us into, I think, unnecessarily into a further fiscal crisis. So with that, Mr. President, and to the chairs of the 2 committees, I do have the auditors here to make a very brief presentation, and I think, of course, will be available for any questions. If you just introduce yourselves, both of you.
Yes, my name is John Scomp, and I'm with the firm of Crow-Horwath, and I also have John Modlin with me as well. And
John, can you just bring the microphone a little bit closer to you so we can hear you a little louder? Thank you.
Yeah. Again, my name is John Scomp, and I'm with the public accounting firm of Crowe Horwath, and John Modlin is with me as well. We are both partners with that firm. Just briefly on my own personal experience with utility regulation, I began my career over 25 years ago with the Public Service Commission of Indiana in reviewing utility regulation and utility rate cases, financing cases, and those type of things. Later that has become now the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. I worked my way up through the Utility Regulatory Commission until I was controller of that agency. And then with the governor at the time, I co-commissioned a committee that redid the regulatory structure of Indiana. I then began working with the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor of the state of Indiana, was head of the technical staff there. So basically at that point, I was head of the engineering, the accounting, and also the economics and finance departments of the state of Indiana's Office of Utility Consumer Counselor. Reviewed many public utilities at that point in my career. Basically all the large electrics of the state of Indiana, water, sewer, also the gas and telephone utilities at that point in time. I then came over to Crowe. Crowe had acquired a firm that has been in the public utility regulatory environment since 1965. At this point in time, I am head of the financial advisory group of Crowe Horwath's Public Sector Services Group. As I said, we've done many utility rate cases. Most of the time, I say 95% of the time, we are normally working for the utility company, but when we were contacted by the Comptroller's office here, we were asked to do a review of what the utility company had put forth. We do have expertise in utility rate setting, utility financing, rating agencies, and those type of things, and we have extensive experience in that. Crowe has offices in 12 states with 26 offices, and so as far as getting by Crowe's credibility and my personal credibility on the issue, I will briefly comment and kind of just explain what we had as far as the executive summary and where we ended up with our recommendations in the report. First of all, what we were hired by the Comptroller's office to do is really look at the four corners of the April 5th letter that was sent supporting DWP's decision not to transfer the $73.5 million to the city. That lack of a transfer did result in basically the city's credit being put on a negative watch, and it would basically be viewed as a downgrade. What we looked at from the statements in the letter, there were 5 statements that were made in the letter as far as supporting the reasons why the transfer couldn't be made. The first statement really came to the fact that the letter kind of tied the transfer to an increase in the ECAF and said that when they had promised to make the transfer, they expected an increase in the ECAF. We limited our review to the documents that we were given, and we also limited our review basically looking at the documents that they had at April 5th that would have supported the letter that was sent. As far as those documents, they had made a lot of projections as far as what a lack of an increase in the ECAF might affect, but all those documents did show that if an ECAF increase was not given, that they could make the full transfer to the city. The second statement that we took a look at was the fact that with a lack of increase in the ECAF, they'd have to use all their funds, all their, quote, surplus money at the time to pay for those costs of increased fuel costs. And again, from the documentation that was given, that was not supported. There's been an undercollection of the fuel costs for quite some time. There was nothing that really showed it had to be taken care of right now at this point in time, and that could be accomplished by not transferring the money. The other thing also was that they showed that they needed, or they stated in the letter that they needed to keep all the cash on hand at this point in time as part of what they called a sound fiscal plan to issue some upcoming bonds. There was other avenues that we've looked at that were available to them besides withholding the payment to the city that would have allowed them to go ahead and make the transfer and issue the bonds in a good sound fiscal condition. Also, they mentioned in their letter that the $300 million level of operating fund balance that they were trying to maintain was recommended by their financial advisors. What we did look at is that their financial advisors did look at the $300 million level that was recommended to them by the DWP, but that was not, the $300 million level was not an amount that was arrived at by their financial advisors or by the rating agencies. And it was a level that was looked at by those agencies that was recommended by them. Also, maintaining the $300 million level was not something that was the sole criteria for maintaining their AA rating at that point in time. It would be one of the criteria that the rating agencies or their financial advisors would look at, but the way the letter stated it appeared that they were viewing it as the only criteria. Also, they did talk about in the letter, and another statement we looked at was the fact that the debt service, the debt reduction trust fund, and maintaining that at a certain level was not something that was absolutely required by the rating agencies or by their financial advisors. The statement in the letter that any change, any significant or material change in that fund balance would cause some material event disclosure requirements or cause arbitrage or tax penalties to be issued. The statement was a bit misleading, and even in talking to their bond counsel and their financial advisors, that it wasn't that any change, if the fund was used in a way that was not allowed by the fund or not within the fund's ordinance, then that would be a problem, but they could have used the fund to do what it was intended to do and make payments on the bond issues, and that would have not had any new arbitrage or tax penalties associated with it. What was explained to us is that all the withdrawals from that fund have to go through some type of evaluation of arbitrage and potential tax liabilities, but they've been able to avoid some of those. Using the fund in the way that it was intended would have been something that would not have required a material event disclosure, and in the past they've been able to work around any of the arbitrage and tax penalties to make sure that those were not due and payable. So in all, as we looked at the four corners of the letters, we really felt like the statements that were made where they tried to support withholding the money to the city were unsubstantiated, and there were other things that could have been done where they could have made the payment to the city and not caused the city the financial hardship that it had as a result of not having the transfer at the time. As the controller mentioned earlier, there has been a response. We've not had time to review that, really just received that letter, but as far as a quick summary of what was in the report, I would leave it at that. So, be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Rosendahl, I believe, had a question.
Clear what you just said about your analysis of it. Are you basically saying that the discussion between the council and the department over that money that we wanted to close that budget situation impacted the rating agencies and therefore cost the city more money?
I'm not sure about the discussion between the council and DWP about their situation. What I was saying is the withholding of the $73.5 million from the city did cause some action on the rating agencies regarding the city's credit rating.
So it did. It did have an impact.
Yes.
How much money are we looking at in terms of taxpayers' dollars did it cost us for that situation?
That is not something that we've looked into and done any analysis on.
But the rating changed because, Madam Controller, is that the case we're hearing
Correct.
here?
And the CAO could respond as well, but the day that we were notified that they would not be transferring the $73 million, we were that evening actually received notice from the rating agencies. And additionally, in one of the, and it was included in my letter, that on April 7th, Moody's explicitly cited the DWP's failure to complete the full power revenue transfer as a cause. The downgrade also partly reflects the likelihood that the city's general fund reserves at the end of the current fiscal year could be materially weaker than we had previously expected, now that an expected transfer from the Department of Water and Power may be reduced.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to return to our chairs. Mr. Koretz or Ms. Perry, did you want to ask anything of the other folks? Okay, if there's another question for the controller, we can ask the other folks to come forward. Okay, thank you. Okay.
No, proceed with the DWP response.
Okay. All right.
We'll be available for
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for your hard work on this. Any people in particular you'd like to come forward, Mr. Koretz or Ms. Perry? The aforementioned? Sorry. All right, the general manager?
Alpert, Mr. Buettner, Mr. Freeman, and Mr. Raj.
All right. If we get those. Okay.
Mr. Raj still here?
I do not know. There he is.
Okay, there he is. Okay, great. Great, and just to start, and Mr. Buettner, I know you weren't here when this all started, so maybe Mr. Alpert, Mr. Freeman, and Mr. Raj can reconstruct for us from whose direction did you follow?
Madam Councilwoman, if you would allow me, please, just to make a brief introductory
Let me just finish my question, if you don't mind. The key question for me is, what direction, who gave the direction not to make the power revenue transfer? And I acknowledge that you weren't here, Mr. Buettner, at the time, and but the other folks were here. And maybe, Mr. Alpert, you could begin as chair of the commission and give us your perspective and your insight.
If you would allow us, as there is some confusion as to why we were not at the prior discussion of this, I'd like just to make a brief introductory remarks, and then I would certainly direct Mr. Alpert or allow Mr. Alpert or anyone else to answer the questions as you wish. It's my pleasure, as always, to be here in front of council. I'd like to first clear the record and make sure it is well understood that for family medical reasons, family medical emergency, I was unable to be at the joint audit and E&E committee meeting. I think that's been communicated. I'm sorry that there may have been some misunderstandings amongst our staffs. Certainly it's my pleasure to be here. The issues raised today are serious. Many have asked the department to look carefully at the issues, and the department now has. We have submitted to this council, we have posted online a series of response. While the proposed ECAF rate increase was dealt with in a politically charged environment, it was and is necessary for those involved to make informed decisions consistent with their duties which stand the test of time. My role as the general manager of the department is to lead it forward, and for the last 3 months we have been doing that. We have reissued our budget for this year, taking out $263 million of costs, which allows us to reduce what would have been rate increases for our ratepayers. We've identified a strategic plan which identifies several issues the department faces, including an issue called once-through cooling. I would urge this council to engage with us in the debate over the consequences of once-through cooling and what we can do to mitigate its economic impacts to our ratepayers. As the general manager, I continue to work with our search firm, Korn Ferry, as finding a permanent leader for the Department of Water and Power is one of our most important imperatives. Transparency and communication with the department, with all of our constituencies, including City Council, is paramount. In that light, what I have asked the department to do so as to avoid any further misunderstandings as to the status of the city transfer is the department will be issuing to council quarterly a report which notes the financial position of the department, its progress toward its budgets in that year, and to note whether there are any issues which would give rise to conflict or the potential for the transfer not to be made. So hopefully we can avoid that issue, at least one of communication, in the future. I would like Mario Ignacio to briefly read to you his transmittal on the report to me of the departments looking at all of these issues, and then I'll ask Mr. Alpert to comment on the question that was raised.
My name is Mario Ignacio. I'm the interim Chief Financial Officer for the department. As requested, attached, please find the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's response to the City Controller's report entitled Report on the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's April 5, 2010 letter regarding the feasibility for transfer of surplus power revenue funds, which was released on June 10, 2010. While the report is not a financial audit, Crowe Horwath, the firm hired by the City Controller to prepare the report, concluded that LADWP assertions made on April 5, 2010 regarding its ability to make $73.5 million transfer to the City of LA are unsubstantiated. After careful review of the report, LADWP believes that the report contains material misstatements of facts and fails to recognize the significance of the financial metrics established by the Board of Water and Power Commissioners on May 21, 2009 in order to maintain its current credit ratings, which have been communicated broadly to the rating agencies and the investor community. In LADWP's review of the report, we have identified a number of fundamental issues that we disagree with that form the foundation of the report's negative conclusions. In the attached response, we discuss LADWP's overall rationale for its course of action over the last 6 months and how this fiscally sound approach is inconsistent with the report's negative conclusions. While LADWP does not intend to engage in an extended debate over Crow-Horwath's findings, we believe it is important to point out the fundamental inaccuracies to the report. The Department appreciates the opportunity to review the report and hope that this feedback can assist the City Controller in better understanding LADWP's fiscal responsible actions that were necessary to protect the interests of its ratepayers.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Lee Alpert. I am here in capacity as President of the Department of Water and Power Board of Commissioners. I'm not quite sure what the question was, other than to inform you that we as a department, as a commission, have a responsibility, according to the charter, a duty and a responsibility to the department to take all actions that are protective and beneficial to the department and its customers. We take that duty very seriously as a commission. We work with the department. We rely on the information that is provided to us by the department in making our decisions, and that is what occurred in this case. The issue of a transfer was never brought before the commission until the day, and I don't recall that date, that we passed it. So as soon as the issue of the transfer was agendized and brought before the commission, our board discussed it, voted on it, and we passed it. Prior to that time, it was the commission's understanding that the department could not make a finding of a surplus, nor would it recommend that the transfer of the $73 million in round figures be completed because of the various financial data that I believe you all have copies of, which indicated that to do so would be irresponsible to the department and would in fact jeopardize the department's bond rating, which would cost the department somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 over a short few years time period in just interest costs alone, that would have caused an increase to our ratepayers, a substantial increase in our ratepayers, for which we would have received nothing. That information was provided to us by the department, the finance people of the department, the senior management of the department. It was expressed in a letter that I think Ms. Gruhl made reference to, that was sent by our general manager, and that was the commission's role in this particular issue. So as soon as we were given the go-ahead in the department, felt that we could do this without any jeopardy to the department or its ratepayers, we immediately and unanimously approved the transfer of the funds. And to the best of my recollection, that was the first time that it was ever agendized for us to determine. So that is the role that the commission played in making this determination. I don't remember what my last sentence was. Well, what I just said was that when the item of the transfer of the agenda, of the transfer of the funds, first appeared on our agenda for us to vote on, we approved it unanimously. That is the only time that that item appeared upon our agenda. That's what I'm saying. And when we approved it, we inquired of the department and our finance people, our senior staff and management, as to whether or not we would be placing the department in any jeopardy and the ratepayers in any jeopardy by making that approval based upon prior financial information and discussions that had been had, I understand, between council, perhaps. I don't know who had discussions. But all I can tell you is that at that point we were told that it would not jeopardize the department, and we can make that transfer. I don't have the exact date, but I'm sure that it's here.
You're talking about the May transfer vote.
Pardon?
That's in May. That's not the subject of this discussion.
Okay, well,
Mr. Freeman, did you want to add?
Yes, if I may. Excuse me. Ms. Hahn, did you want to speak?
Go ahead, don't worry. She'll press her button. She needs to speak.
Let me... Is it my turn, Ms. Perry?
Sure, go ahead, please, Mr. Freeman.
On March the 3rd, I personally engaged in a briefing with the Fitch rating system, and I offer for the record a copy of the presentation that we made. And we had one sheet that said, potential future rate action, proposed increase in ECAP cap. And we laid out to Fitch that we were essentially relying on the ECAF being approved. At that time, I already had in hand a report that Chairman Perry wisely asked the City Council to undertake an independent audit and review of our ECAF request that was done by PA Consulting. I had said that we need over 4 quarters, a 2-cent increase. They said we didn't allow for contingencies, and they thought it ought to be 2.8 cents. But we had the draft of that report in hand, and so we presented to the rating agencies that our financial situation was going to include this increase. Then at a public board meeting, my good friend, on March 18th, when the ECAF was approved by the board, I made it abundantly clear what the staff recommendation was. And if I may quote from what I said in public on March 18th, I recited the history of the ECAF and said, according to our books, we're losing about $6 million a week on these items, and our cash is going down as far as the best figures I can look at and see is that if we don't get some relief in the coming weeks, we will not be able to meet our minimum requirements, and in my humble opinion, we will not be able to make the payments to the general fund that they are counting on for the city's solvency. So what we have before us is a situation, and I went on to describe, where we need this increase or we'll be downgraded, and et cetera. So it was public knowledge that we represented to our Board of Commissioners on March 18th that it was a staff recommendation, and I use the word recommendation, that we didn't feel that we were in a financial situation to make that payment. That was on the 18th of March. I then went on a vacation that had been planned months ago. It was a bar mitzvah in Israel that I went and attended, and I was gone from the 22nd of March until April 5th, when I returned and on Monday morning and found on my desk the proposed letter of April 5th. I read that letter very carefully, and I agreed then and agreed today completely with what's in it. I might say to my good friend, the comptroller, is she here? Neither you nor your staff.
If you could turn to the microphone, because we can't.
Neither the comptroller or any of the Crow people that were testifying here called on me to ask for my opinion or to consult with me on the contents of my letter. That was a letter of April 5th, and then after I leave the department, there's this press conference and all this stuff about this letter. Mr. President, if you and I were the referees and this were a football game, I think that we would give the controller a 15-yard penalty for piling on. I mean, this was way after the fact. I was not called upon, and the language that was used was just uncalled for. I mean, Mr. Buettner, I think, has had the opportunity to reply to the report. I never received a copy of it from her or anyone else, and I can tell you, in glancing over it superficially, these arguments are trying to argue with a board of directors that made decisions that they believed was in the interest of the ratepayer. The charter is very clear. Let me just finish. Okay. The charter is very clear on where the responsibility lies. It's vested in the Water and Power Commission. The staff makes the best recommendations we know how, and I think our recommendations were based upon our financial situation. I mean, there was testimony just now that the fact that the transfer was not made hurt your credit. Well, folks, the opposite is also true. The fact that you turned down our ECAF request hurt our credit. And our bond rating for the bonds that we later issued was withdrawn the next day. And the professionals here have a job of going by the charter and making recommendations to a commission, and there has to be surplus money for them to make a finding to transfer it to the city. Now, a deficit is not a surplus. We were running $6 million a week in deficit, and I stand by everything I said, but the responsibility for the decision is in the Board of Harbor Commissioners, and second-guessing a decision they made in 2009 is kind of silly.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. We have a long queue right now. Mr. Alarcon, myself, Mr. Zine, Mr. Corey, Mr. Labange for the first time, Mr. Kretz and Mr. Kretz and Ms. Perry for a second time following that. So, Mr. Alarcon?
Council members, I am very pleased that we are having this discussion. I have had a long-standing concern, as evidenced by the fact that I sued the city and the department for the transfer. What we have is a charter that delineates quite specifically the purpose of the Department of Water and Power and the purpose of the City Council's administration, the City Council and Mayor's administration and provision of services to the City of Los Angeles. The problem here is not whether or not DWP could have transferred $73 million or not. The problem is that we have this incessant desire to take money from DWP that they need to provide DWP power and water to the constituents of Los Angeles, the ratepayers. So I would ask DWP one question. If you have any money left over at the end of the day, give it to the ratepayers. Don't give it to Los Angeles, the general fund. We have increased our reliance on that fund, that transfer, to the extent that we are now pitting one agenda against the other. And I think it's only going to get worse, folks, if we continue to have this transfer, because DWP cannot continue to pay for the services that we should be getting through other measures. So this council has demonstrated over the years an insistence of continuously taking from DWP. You're not taking from DWP, you're taking from the ratepayers of Los Angeles. So we have set up a collision course, and we have now collided. Because the board of DWP commissioners is trying to protect the interests as mandated by our charter. And yet, we keep challenging them by taking more and more and more. Now, if you truly want to save the ratepayers and truly do not want to approve rate increases, then simply give them back the transfer money. And you don't have to increase the rates. But you know that's not going to happen. But this discussion here is bogus, because it's not dealing with the fact that this council and mayor have been overly reliant on the transfer from DWP that has undermined our infrastructure over the years. And that's why water pipes were bursting. And I believe that we're going to have similar problems on the power side. And we have seen brownouts. So we can have this discussion till the day is long. The commissioners believe they were doing the right thing for DWP. The City of Los Angeles council members are going to say, well, you lied to us when you said you needed the $73 million unless we get a rate increase. You know, that's a circular argument as far as I'm concerned. The real issue is to reduce the reliance of the City of Los Angeles on the transfer of now well over $200 million and going up from DWP.
Thank you, Mr. Alarcon. Our next speaker on this subject will be Council President Eric Garcetti.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to our chairs, and thank you to the controller as well. I should warn you, Mr. Freeman, that football metaphors are the sole area of Mr. Labange in these council chambers, so you're treading on very dangerous territory bringing up football metaphors in his presence. That said, I'm not going to give a long speech. I'll try to make a couple concise points. And I just did want to correct one fact when you said that your bonds were withdrawn. That was by the action of DWP. It wasn't some sort of withdrawal because it was a preventative thing that was done in anticipation.
That's the ratings were withdrawn by the rating agency.
The rating was correct, but the withdrawal of the bond issuance was a decision made by management. I think what we've seen with the controller's audit here is that a confirmation, I think, of what a lot of us felt and did not sit easy with us or sit pretty with us, and I think this is a proud department with an amazing history in this city. But I think that it did bear out a couple things. One, on what happened this spring with the proposed rate increases. The department overreached, that the department misled the people of the city and their democratically elected representatives, that things were rushed, and in defense of this board, while we can say the governance is that the board ultimately is, and that's correct in the charter, the governing body, just like today when we have a response in the morning, I watched, Ms. Perry witnessed as well, how late the decision makers are given the information upon which to reflect. And so Mr. Buettner, who I think has done a great job coming in and you know, in an interim basis, the work that he has done, I think one of the best reforms you can give the policymakers is none of us, when this happens in our body, and we get a report the morning of, it almost gets continued right away. Because the time to reflect, to think, to go through and not in essence be told, we can say, you know, this is something that's common throughout the city. I know the ethics commissioners, for instance, recently are saying this about ethics legislation, that sometimes they don't know what's going on and then they're given things at the last minute. We can't be good policy-making bodies, whether it's a board of water and power commissioners or the city council, when information is held tightly. Which gets me to the next point, which is something I know that the department now embraces, but I think the importance of a ratepayer advocate is that you can have that information, somebody who has that ability for even the board themselves to say, hey, I need a second opinion. There are good and great people in this department who are incredibly smart and who have made our water and power rates generally cheaper than outside the city, who have built this city up, but that doesn't mean they're infallible and will never do things that are misled. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the who said and who did, because I know what happened. I think we all know what happened. I think we know who was kind of pushing these things and what the flow of information, how that was being directed. What's more important is getting some concrete solutions here today. Ratepayer advocate, a second motion that I've been introducing today as part of this, I think that you need the budget earlier. We get the budget by April 20th. You get it quite late in the board, and I think it would be a positive thing for us to change the charter to put that in line with what the city has to do with its own budget. I think will help our general managers. I think will help the people of Los Angeles be able to reflect. The problem is information gets rushed up to the end, and then it's kind of like, you got to do this or not. And when that gun is put to our heads, this year we said not. Not because that was necessarily the only way to go, but with a lack of full information And without the gamemanship behind it, it was very difficult for anyone to make those decisions. So I urge folks to continue to support that, to do it in a public process, to make sure that we have somebody who can be there. Mr. Freeman has said often we're all supposed to be ratepayer advocates. Absolutely. But we need somebody who can do that and get that information out there. And I think the Comptroller's report, say what you want about piling on, and I have a great deal of respect for you too, Mr. Freeman, but I think it's important for that to be said as crystal clear as possible. Information was kept from this body, information was kept from the people of Los Angeles, and when it was investigated by others, the main excuse did not bear out. And I'll end with this. The idea that all other things were static, I think Mr. Buettner has shown us that there are other ways to save money in the department so that we don't have a false choice between, look, our bond rating will go down, we can't meet our payroll, we can't do all those things if you don't give us X. Creative management and other ways of doing things will always give us the choice, and as you said, Mr. Buettner, these are policy decisions. Maybe we hold off in a bad year on certain things so that we can keep rates down for ratepayers and for our businesses and for those families who are struggling, and then that becomes a policy choice. But we were given a false choice that it was an either-or, and there was no other possible way to save money, so it had to be a rate increase. And I think that's what the Comptroller's report bore out for us, and thank you for that. And I hope that we can move forward on some positive solutions and some of the positive things that are going on in the department now.
Mr. Kokoria?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm encouraged, Mr. Buettner, by the statements that you've made since your arrival here about the need to increase accountability and transparency at the DWP. I think it's obviously vitally important to the city, and I'm glad that you've made that central to what you see as being your mission. And I'm going to appreciate having the opportunity to work closely with you moving forward towards that objective. I have to say, as of this moment, I'm not encouraged by some of the start that we've had in that effort because while I understand that there are family emergencies that happen, we did have a number of hearings at which we didn't have any opportunity to ask any substantive questions at all of anyone, yourself or others. Mr. Freeman's letter was dated April 5th. At that time, the DWP had every bit of information that the Comptroller relied upon in her audit report. So for it to have taken April, May, June, July to provide a response to that, when we have a limited body of information that the audit report relied upon and that Mr. Freeman's letter relied upon, is incomprehensible to me. The fact that on this morning, as the City Controller of Los Angeles is walking into these chambers, she gets a response to the audit that was provided to DWP 6 weeks ago in draft form is incomprehensible to me. It just is. And I'd like to understand that better. Why the delay in responding to these very, very serious charges, especially when we have a limited body of information that really needs to even be reviewed and considered?
Sure. It's a fair question because, as I said in my opening remarks, these are serious issues. The delay, as I noted in the transmittal I sent to Council when I could not be at the hearing, was a combination of a couple of factors. First, I'm new, so I wanted to make sure that a careful review was done. I was not working for the department on April 5th. I was not working for the department or the city in August of 2009 when the issue was first raised. So it takes some time to get oneself up to speed. I did not become the general manager with the intention of reliving the discussion of ECAF of last year. That took some time. Second, as I noted, the most pressing issue I felt for the leadership of the department was to immediately address our cost issues, as Councilman Alarcon has referenced, and we issued a revised budget later in the month of June. We also issued a strategic plan, and the combination of those two things allowed us to cut rates, both on the water and power side. I made that a priority for the department ahead of responding to the Comptroller's report. You and I could have a debate over that. But once those were made, once we were able to cut rates, once we were able to cut our costs, I then asked the senior leadership several of them are here today, to make responding to this report their number one priority. But it occurred at a time where the same people needed to respond were doing both things. In a perfect world, we do them all overnight, but I wanted to make sure it was done carefully. As many have noted, these were very serious issues raised. I wanted to make sure the homework was done and we're in a position to respond. I would be delighted to come back. I apologize and appreciate the notion that being presented today with the department's response is a bit short notice. We'd be delighted to come back and answer any questions you may have.
Councilman, could I say a word? I know you're a very fair person. I know you personally. But the fact that there was a draft response 6 weeks ago about a letter that I wrote and I was not contacted, seems to me as much of a failure as anything. I can defend that letter, and I signed it. And it's my letter, and the controller's hired a bunch of people to make a review of it, and I was never didn't know that there was a draft. I could have contributed to the draft and maybe not offended Councilman LeBlanc with a football joke.
Okay, if I may, Mr. Freeman, Mr. President, if I may just follow up on this point for a moment, because I appreciate that, Mr. Freeman, and you suggested, you mentioned earlier that you had been out of the country, you returned and found the letter on your desk on April 5th. So I'd like to know who drafted the letter, who was consulted before the letter was drafted, who at DWP provided any data or analysis that went into the conclusions of that letter. I'd like to know what outside consultants outside of DWP were consulted before that letter was sent. I'd like to know whether anyone at DWP provided any contrary opinion or advice at all with regard to the withholding of the power revenue transfer before April 5th. I'd like to know if there was any information that was available in the audit that was prepared by the controller prior to April 5th that was not available to the DWP prior to April 5th. And I'd like to know whether there was any discussion with any credit agencies specific to this power revenue transfer prior to that letter of April 5th, other than the briefing that you described that happened on March 3rd. I'd like to get answers to those questions, whether it's now or when the DWP returns on the next round. And if I may just add one further point to that, Mr. Alpert, I think you mentioned that the board did not consider a potential declaration of surplus funds until the meeting at which the declaration was actually made and the power revenue transfer was approved. Is that true?
Would you repeat that, please?
I think if I understood you correctly, I believe what you said earlier was that the board did not discuss whether there was whether a declaration of surplus could be possible until the meeting at which the board approved the power revenue transfer. Is that right?
Formally, that is correct. That's when the item appeared as an agendized item. That is when we had the formal discussion and passed the vote. That was after the ECAF had gone into effect, and the department had indicated at that time that they could be supportive of that.
Okay, so at no point prior to that did staff put on the board's agenda for discussion whether or not there were sufficient funds available to be able to make a declaration of surplus funds so that the board could discuss it and consider it and consider other options and consider contrary opinions and consider whether or not there might be cost-cutting measures that might be available. At no point prior to the approval of the power revenue transfer did any of that come before the board for discussion.
Well, I think as Mr. Freeman had indicated, he raised some of those issues in March. When he raised some concerns, we have engaged in a number of cost-cutting measures, both under Mr. Freeman and currently now under our current general manager. And so I think the concept of doing what we could to cut costs was always in our mind to make the transfer. But in terms of the actual commission action, there was no agendized item for us to formally discuss prior to the date that we voted on that.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I'm sorry, I shot out a few questions there and didn't give you an opportunity to respond, so let me just do that.
Summary answer.
And then we have Mr. Zine will be the next speaker after that. Go ahead, please.
The letter was prepared by our chief financial officer and his staff and was presented to me by our chief operating officer, and I ascertained that they had signed off on the letter. I personally have about 35 or 40 years experience managing public power agencies, not private companies, as the Crow organization was talking about. And it was my own considered opinion that looking at the city charter, which uses the word surplus, since we were running a deficit, that we didn't have a surplus. And, you know, maybe people on this council could say that I was wrong, but that was my considered judgment that I presented to the commission at the time that they approved the rate increase. And yes, it was not a formal item on the agenda, but I was left with the impression that the board understood that we were making a joint decision, as we do at DWP, that the board concurred in the fact that we were not going to write a check for the rest of the transfer. We don't play games with each other, and the board was fully informed verbally at that meeting that was our recommendation. It was their decision. And frankly, that's just the reasons I stand by. And, you know, some of the arguments against it are borderline ludicrous. We don't finance capital with 100% debt. We couldn't possibly do it. So we have 40%, it's one of the rules of the commission, our financial rule, that we have 60% debt and 40% equity. And that's why the rates are as low as they are now, because we've been financing our power plants with 40% equity over the years. So some of the arguments in that, if they had contacted me, I could have explained to them that they were just not appropriate for a public power agency like DWP. The rest of the things were judgments that we made. The judgments can be questioned, but the charter puts the responsibility in the DWP board, and our job is to obey the charter.
Mr. Zine.
Thank you. I know we're all concerned about transparency and integrity in the system. And I don't want to find fault with anyone except maybe get to some solutions for the future. And I want to commend our controller for bringing forth the information as best as she had at that particular time. Now we're looking back and trying to find out where it went sideways. Mr. Albert, you mentioned that the commission approved the transfer of the $73 million. That was not done. Who stopped that from taking place? Where did the direction, when the commission gave you mentioned that the commission voted to approve the transfer. That was stopped by someone. Who stopped it?
No, I think you must have misunderstood my testimony. My testimony, and again, I wish I had the date, was that when the first time, to my knowledge, that the transfer became, and it was May the 4th, thank you, May the 4th, and our board meeting of May the 4th was the first time that it became an agendized item. And at that time, we voted unanimously to transfer the funds because the department indicated that we would not be jeopardizing the department's financial condition and or the ratepayers at that point. At that point, my understanding is the transfer was made immediately after that.
Prior to that time, there was the question of the transfer.
Prior to that time,
from the commission. Did it ever come up at the commission?
Prior to that time, it had not been agendized. The only discussions that were had were discussions such as Mr. Freeman referenced in his general manager's report that he gave relative to the financial condition of the department. But prior to that time, my understanding was from the general manager and from the department that they would not could not make a finding, would not make a finding of surplus, which is, I am told, required for us to make the transfer, and would not recommend that the transfer take place because of the financial position it would put the department in. But that was, it was never agendized because it would not have been recommended, nor likely would it have been approved.
And that took place after the approval by this council to increase the rate. That's when it went on the schedule for the commission.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And prior to that, there was the back and forth to decide what was going to happen. You folks voted, it came here, went back, it was rejected here. The other situation that I have is the reserve. There was question about having $1 billion in reserves. Was that ever discussed? The reserves that the Department of Water and Power held? Because we were told that there were substantial reserves at the Department of Water and Power. In spite of this transfer, there were substantial reserves.
Councilmember Zine, I cannot recall exactly what was discussed, but I do know that as a board member, there are various funds that the department has, whether you call them a reserve or whether you call them a trust fund, et cetera, et cetera. But it was my understanding that in making the recommendations that Mr. Freeman and the department made, that all of that information was considered. And as a commission, what we are obligated to do is to rely on the information that is provided to us by the experts who work for us in our department, who we have believed have had great credibility in terms of financially what they have done. Now, subsequent to the Comptroller's report coming out, at the very first meeting after that report, when we as a commission saw that report, we requested of the department, and they consented through Mr. Buettner, to provide us with responses, just as they're providing today, to provide the commission with responses publicly so that we knew whether or not we could continue to rely on the financial information that is provided to us by our department.
So, Mr. Freeman, I asked you at that time, what were the reserves to be?
We have had for years a reserve fund which is in lieu of a dedicated debt coverage fund. These funds are the building blocks in our AA rating. They are not surplus money, and they're not money that the department has ever dipped into for any purpose. They serve three purposes.
It's money that the department's holding, and the question is, how much do they have? How much are they holding?
I think the reserve fund is around $500 million.
$500 million.
But
So
it's been there for years, and it's there.
I understand. So at the time this transfer was discussed, it was stated that unless this increase took place on the consumers of Los Angeles, the department would be in hard financial times because of the bonds, yet they had substantial money that was sitting there.
No, the argument that I think I made before this council on the 6th of April is that if you don't see the money come in to pay next month's mortgage, you can't write a check with what little money you have this month. And when the council failed to approve the ECAF increase, we had a huge hole. We were losing money. There was no surplus. The reserve funds are never been a fund that you could dip into. We've promised the bondholders, the rating agencies, that those funds would be there as a guarantee that the debt would be serviced as part of our liquidity and as a hedge against the bonds that we had that were variable rate.
Yet each month, the consumers of Los Angeles, both residential and business, pay the department through the billing process. Every month, there's a continuing flow of cash into the department.
And they benefit from the fact that we have a AA rating and been able to borrow billions of money at a much lower rate than we would have without you can question the whole financial structure of the DWP, but it's been that way for years, and the charter entrusts that into the board of directors, and they have a right. I want to say this clearly. They have a right to rely on the opinion of people like myself who have expertise in the field.
I just feel we were held hostage. The council and the people of L.A. were held hostage by the Department of Water and Power.
We were protecting the ratepayers of L.A., which is our job.
Mr. Labange.
Thank you very much. I was thinking, members, in this discussion, Mr. Alicorn, I like you. I do not believe what you said, though, about the transfer. I think the transfer that's happened here over the years is because the people of Los Angeles saw it important to have municipal power. Instead of transferring the money to dividends like Edison does or PG&E, we transferred back to the city to help parks and libraries, and I wish we could get more. I think it's real important, whether it's the large cross-county, city power grids that are the transmission lines or the waterways. Those are what private utilities pay easements for. This is part of that experience. And this company is not a company, it's a public utility that doesn't pay property taxes in this county. It pays it in a transfer to the people of Los Angeles. So I think we should really look at that and focus on that, as opposed to saying don't do the transfer. I think we always, on one hand, you could say this is good. They have pipes that run 70 years. I mean, that's one hand, that's good. But when they all bust at once, you need to give Malinowski more support so we can get them fixed. And that's a key aspect of it. I did want to mention that. On this report, though, Mr. Freeman, I just say that because you say, I don't think it was piling on by the gruel. There may be a little motion, not a procedure problem, really, in the sense is how we look at things. Neither here nor there. We're here today. And water and power is important, and it's important to the city. And it's important to transform. It's been difficult having a different quarterback every season. The two quarterbacks who sit here today were not here when ECAF first came here that started it all. So we've had a different quarterback, and we need some continuity there and a good game plan to move forward that's transparent, that people know. DWP wins when it delivers, and when it delivers, it's very good. It did it when there was a crisis in this state, and it could do it again. So I would just like to say we need to be more transparent. We need to count on it. Over at Mr. Bryson used to run Edison. Is that right? He's now gone, John? Okay. He could call someone and find out exactly where everything was now. I don't know if we could do that in our business practice here. We should know what type of money we have when it's available to be transferred, because it's an investment in the city that is so important. So I need to see that in the future. And I need to see DWP not be afraid to go out and do its job, which is so key on this. And I also say in closing, just one thing on that, real simple. The calls that I've taken recently are a variety of issues, but a number of them come from retired people who say they want to go to the music center and they can't park at DWP anymore. And if I got a house and I got a big lot, I want to let people park on my lot to help them. This is a small thing, and I don't think you know this, Mr. Buterin, but I know your president does, and Mr. Freeman does, and Mr. Rahman Raj does. You got security up there. Open the doors for the people who come to the Civic Center so they can park there. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hahn is our next speaker, then Mr. Parks and Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, am glad we're having this discussion. For a different reason than Councilmember Alarcon is having this discussion, which they're all good reasons. But I do think in my time on the City Council, 9.5 years, I never remembered a time when I did feel so deceived, as Dennis Zine said, so held hostage by the department's refusal to transfer the surplus money. And it's unfortunate, while it was very welcome to have Ms. Kroll's audit, it was unfortunate that we really even needed to have the controller's audit to tell us what I think most of us suspected, was that, in fact, the money was there. It could have easily been transferred and not put the department in jeopardy. And what happened, in fact, what it did was that it did put the city in jeopardy. And Mr. Freeman, I will tell you, you say your job is to watch out for the ratepayers. No ratepayer I know feels like you're watching out for them when you raise the rates or when you keep asking to raise rates. And I will tell you, the one time that we voted no in this city council to send it back to the commission, I probably got more thank yous out there from ratepayers who said, thank you, city council, because you are watching out for us, because frankly this is not a good time for our rates to be raised. So, and I don't think the ratepayer should be used in a way that's different from constituents. So you're not acting like you're serving some group of Angelinos and we're serving another group. Your ratepayers are our constituents. And many times they don't feel like DWP is watching out for them. Every time we propose to raise rates, that's not how they're feeling. I just want to tell you that. I think for me the issue, Lee, is, it's very clear cut in the city charter in section 344. Very clear cut. The city council, by ordinance, directs the department to transfer the surplus money with approval of the citizen commissions. And the Citizen Commission approved the 147, which was transferred with the understanding, with the good faith, with the City Council that the 73 would follow. First of all, there's nothing in our city charter that actually even allows for the payment plan. We've done that over the years. We've sort of allowed the department to make this transfer in payments, but there's nothing in the city charter that really allows for that. Once the surplus has been determined, and it was $220 million, that was agreed upon. Once that happens, and we ask for that to be transferred, really the board is supposed to either say yes or no, and the board did say yes. With the agreement that the $73 million would come later. And we know that even in Jan Perry's committee, the same staff that even wrote the report that maybe had a few negative reasons on why the last 73 couldn't be transferred actually said to her committee that it could be transferred. So there's really nothing in our city charter, David, that really allows you to come in at a certain point and say, by the way, we don't have that money anymore. It's not there. That's not what the city charter says. Once we determine the surplus, once we, by ordinance, say to transfer it, the commission, not the general manager, the commission decides yes or no. So really there was no role in our city charter for this kind of number crunching, game playing, deception that we saw so clearly through this process. So it's unfortunate. We should stick to the city charter, or I propose that the department begins to pay taxes like everyone else. In fact, I would like to see that. I don't know if we've even looked at how much taxes you think that would be. Well, it'd be interesting to see what that amount would be. So I'm hoping we'll be transparent in the future. I'm hoping we'll, if you want to use any kind of a sports analogy, we're on the same team. We're on the same team. It is not you versus us. It's not ratepayers versus constituents. We're a city family. We're all on the same team. And we're all working to serve the public the best we can. The display that I saw recently was appalling to me, and it wasn't a feeling that we were in the same city family. We were working together. Our ratings matter to each other. Your ratings matter to us. Our ratings should matter to you, and it's unfortunate that we got into this game playing that we did. I, for one, don't ever want to see it happen again. I, for one, want to rely on the commission, the Citizens Commission that's appointed by the mayor and confirmed by us, that is there to be the real ratepayer advocates. They are there to be that level of government between the elected officials and between city staff to do what's best for the people. I think we ought to stick to Section 344. That's what the city charter says. Once they determine, by listening to the staff, that it can be transferred, it should happen. Period. End of story.
Ms. Hahn, I agree with you. We should stick to the charter. This commission never made a finding of surplus of $220 million. They just did not. And I agree we're one family, and I do agree that when you turned down our request for a rate increase that your own consultants said we needed, that hurt our credit rating. And of course,
that $73 million would come later. That adds up to $220.
I don't know who the they is. We expected it because we thought we'd get the rate increase.
It was, I think Mr. Krikorian will address that point in a little bit. Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Beaton, I just have 5 points. And the one thing that I would like to go through, and until these get resolved, I think the major issues of the council will remain basically suspect as it relates to actions of the Department of Water and Power. And the 5 things that I think have come out in a prior meeting and in committee is that, first of all, it's clear the department unnecessarily and inappropriately merged the discussion of ECAF and the transfer. It's clear that the transfer is based on previous year and the ECAF is going forward. And the fact that they did that, and even in their response, as you glance through the response, there's more discussion about the ECAF than the issue of the transfer. To then create a definition that says the surplus is based on going forward is inappropriate because the surplus was declared on the previous year that closed out months ago. So that's one issue. The other issue is that in going forward, to have the ECAF, which was only 1 quarter, include substantive programs is basically a departure from previous, where ECAF in the past was always considered giving you the flexibility to move on the volatility of the market. To put green power in there for a portion of it is somewhat a departure. The other issue that makes it somewhat of a concern is that for the department to determine that they were financially insolvent when we know that the ECAF was only going to produce $48 million for 1 quarter, 30 of which was going into the operating budget. With that, it tells us you couldn't be insolvent if all you were going to recover was $30 million in the operation. And so the issue as we go forward also, and this is a term and it may be offensive, but the issue, it appeared the department basically got involved in what I call a reverse Enron. They depreciated the value of their asset in order to reflect that they couldn't make the transfer. And the issue is, it's pretty clear they could make the transfer. They had over $1 billion in liquid cash in 2 accounts, in which at this council, they told us in one of those accounts they hadn't gone to in almost a decade and only once in a decade. So no matter how you split up the label of the account, they both are $500 million, and they both are there available as cash. I think the report from the consultant reflected they could work almost a 6-month period on that cash alone and not be insolvent. The other issue I think is important is that when they split the money as far as the 147 and the 73, it set a stage for what appeared to be somewhat of a hostage-taking. And the fact that not only did they split it, they told us at committee and at council that the 73 would be here in 2 months. It wasn't until the council accepted the 147 that then it was tied and said, we can't give you the 73. But what was interesting is even as they said we can't give you the 173 or give you the 73, they also included in the report $20 million bump. If we would give them the rate increase, they would find $20 million in efficiencies to up our total from 73 to 93. Those are so inconsistent in the sense of working with a department that we would have to rely on to be able to say what they tell us is truthful. And then to see the corresponding reduction in our bond fund, that's nationwide impact on the city's reputation, the impact on our trans and a variety of other things, it's pretty clear that in their effort to look very parochial at their issues, that they cost the city millions of dollars. And I don't think they can basically ignore the facts that I've just given you, because historically we have gone through this year after year. It's the first time in anyone's memory that we've split the transfer. It's the first time in anybody's memory that the transfer that's based on the previous year was moved up into the current year, and the surplus was debated as to whether there was a surplus in this current year, when we know that months ago they declared the surplus on the previous year. And so it's an accounting issue, it's a terminology issue. And then I think when we talk about Ms. Gruhl's audit, when we were told over and over again that they were basing all of these decisions on the fact that they had gotten financial advice that basically advised them to up their reserve, and we said, bring the material that you were using as a resource. They didn't bring us anything. They said it didn't exist. When you talk to the auditor, what they say, they didn't go to the financial advisor and say, is it better to be at 150 or 300? And at the time they were saying they had no money, they actually had gone to 450. And so they had doubled it in a year, and then they had another $150 million, and then they said, we still don't have enough. But the auditor found out from the financial advisors, they basically were told by the department, we're going to increase it to 300. What do you think? That's not financial advice. That's not asking them to tell them where they should be as it relates to their financial stability.
Thank you, Mr.
So,
Parks.
in my judgment, those things that I just brought up are the key factors. Until resolved, until the decision's made as to who concocted this story, who gave the direction for it to occur, I don't think we may have to go on, but I don't think people will be satisfied. So those are the things that I think, in a nutshell, for me, have to be resolved. For me to have any faith that when DWP shows up and says, I need A, B, and C, that I'm going to have to spend months figuring out whether it's A and a half, B and a half, or whether they're telling the truth at all. So those are the things I'd ask you to consider and look at.
Sure, and I won't comment on all the comments, but there are just a couple of points I would make on that. First, I think we're in strong agreement that what is currently an ECAF doesn't represent the appropriate use of a pass-through item like that. And you'll recall in my presentation, our strategic plan, we're going to propose this year a simplification of rate structure, which will make sure that we don't wind up in that situation again. As to the amount of cash on the balance sheet, let me just make a comment, and it's in the department's report. As of March 31, which was our balance sheet, or the department's balance sheet that everyone was looking at the time of the transfer, the department owed about $5.3 billion and had something in the order of $1 billion of cash. The cash forecast between capital investment and other items which were contractual commitments of the department was to deplete substantially all of that prior to a bond financing. The agreements or the commitments that the department makes in order to be able to borrow $5.3 billion or another $5.3 billion over the next decade are to provide in reserve for the benefit of the bondholders a certain amount of liquidity, and that's the source of those funds. That's why they haven't been tapped for a decade, and hopefully they won't be tapped for a decade, because at the time we do tap those, the department will be downgraded. There will be a severe financial penalty that the Department of Water and Power would pay. Again, I can't speak to the other comments. I recognize that it's the department's challenge to make sure that there is a consistent exchange of ideas and information with this council. Again, I would point to the notion I would like to make sure this department does receive and present to City Council quarterly a report on the status of the transfer to make sure that this incident is not repeated.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I look at this group of people here today, I see Mr. Buhner, who I've gotten to know recently and who I already have great respect for. I see Mr. Friedman, who is quite a character, but he's been a friend of mine for about 15 years. I've worked with him. I trust him on these issues. I see in the back over there Ms. Gruhl, who I knew for 10 years before she was elected to the council, and served with her on the budget committee for 6 years together, and have utmost respect for her as well. And Mr. Alpert, who not only lives in my district, but I've known him for 30 years. I knew him when he was a little boy, who is now a LAPD officer, was a young man. So these are people I have respect for. These are people I consider friends. I see no advantage to playing the blame game today. I don't think anything good is derived from that. It's not about what happened, but rather what are we going to do from here forward. It's not about blaming blame and say who did what when, who's responsible. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, this council, that board, and that department all look like fools through this whole process. And I think we all suffered a tremendous amount of disrespect in the public, and to some degrees rightfully so, because we all handled it poorly. I'm worried about how we're going to go forward, and I think it's important to do that. You have a motion before you by Mr. Garcetti, which I supported, that says let's marry up our budget process. As a member of the Budget and Finance Committee, we look at a 2,000-page budget when it comes out. 3 pages are water and power. We don't even see their budget. We get a synopsis of what their budget is. We have no knowledge of that. And so it's important for this committee, this council, to understand the water and power, what they're doing, what their budget is, what we can expect from our responsibility in setting rates in the future, in the coming year. That brings the clarity to us. That helps them do their job better. And I think we'll have a better process as we go forward. Also before you is a motion which I introduced with 7 members of this council, which was going to change, I think, the way we do things. I want to point out that the people of this city over 100 years ago passed a charter amendment that established this transfer. And the reason they did that is because the people of this city built the water system, not Department of Water and Power. There was no Department of Water and Power. In fact, it was only the Department of Water and the Department of Power at the time. The citizens, through their tax abilities, built the system. And in 1859, in fact, and a lot of you know I'm writing a book, I found a document that said in 1859, the water overseer, which was essentially the general manager of Water and Power, was paid $1,080 a year. The mayor was paid $800. So the people of this city said that the Water and Power Department was more important than the mayor, and by the way, the council got paid nothing. There's probably a lot of people who'd like that to happen today. But the point is, water was very important to our foundation. It was critical to the establishment of the city of L.A. I don't think we do any good by plundering that department today. And so the motion I am bringing forward does essentially what we did about 3 years ago as the Budget and Finance Committee struggled with the Cultural Affairs Department. Wendy remembers this fight. We had an annual fight over Cultural Affairs funding, could never figure out their budget, never figured out how we get the money to them and how much exactly. And so we said, let's just go backwards 1 year, take the amount of money they actually got, and establish the formula from which they get the money this year. That permanently fixed forever the budget problem with cultural affairs. And the motion I brought in today says let's do that with Water Power. Let's go back 1 full year, take the June 30th dollar amount that we know, calculate the figure based on a formula we agree to, it's done, then you go forward and you have a year to make the transfer, and you know exactly what it is. It gives you timing, that gives you clarity, that gives you an opportunity to plan in advance almost a year before you transfer the money so you can accumulate the amount of money you need. It lets the bonding agents know exactly what the transfer is going to be, and it says to the people of LA, this is the system you built, we fixed it, now we'll never have this issue again. It will never be a dispute. It will never be a question of whether the money's there or not. It gives the department plenty of time to put the money in escrow and hold it for the transfer that will come a year later. I think this brings the clarity and the resolve that we need to this problem, and that will be my recommendation, members of the council, that today we send both those, Mr. Garcetti's and my motions to the committee, get them back as soon as possible and get them on the ballot later this year, along with the 5 proposals Ms. Perry and I brought forward to reform the department. We need to reform DWP. Even some of the people over there have agreed to that. Let's work forward to building a better LA DWP, one that is very transparent, and one that people can give some reliability to, including this council, as to how we treat it, how we do it, and there will never be these kind of debates again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Perry and Mr. Kurtz?
Thanks, Mr. President, and Mr. Smith. You can rest assured that I will expedite the proposals that are before us so that we can achieve structural change. And I asked a pretty simple question at the beginning of this conversation. I didn't get an answer. I don't want to devote any more time to these sort of circular, wasteful discussions because I'm not going to get an answer. It's quite clear. I also want to refer to the real heroes for me in this story, PA Consulting. These are the consultants that have been retained by the City Council to advise us on things like the energy cost adjustment factor, how the debt reduction trust fund can be. These are third-party, independent consultants who provided us with a vast amount of information. If only we had been able to get that from our own department, we might not have needed to hire them in the first place. And I hope that the department will be gracious and make sure that their bill is paid. I do realize that it is on the commission agenda tomorrow, but I just want to make sure that their bill does get paid in a timely way, because even though this may be painful for some, this does make for, in the long run, a better opportunity not only for the department to improve its operations, but it's better for us, it's better for the ratepayers. So the board is for oversight. Mr. Freeman, I just wanted to correct you on your interpretation of the charter, section 344. It does say that the council can direct by ordinance surplus money in the Power Revenue Fund to be transferred to the reserve fund with the consent of the board in charge of the fund. That's the DWP board. So I just wanted you to hear that for the record, and also, more than that, everybody who's listening, so that they're not confused. So with that, as I said in the beginning of the conversation, I set this forward to council without recommendation. I am more than happy to move forward with Mr. Smith's proposals, get them on the energy and environment agenda as quickly as possible, and instead of wasting time like hamsters on a treadmill, I would like to just devote our energy to getting all of these items on the ballot for March And like I said before, I'm sure they'll pass and we won't even have to campaign.
Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't necessarily want to have to engage in the blame game as Mr. Smith mentioned, but I think at the same time, if we just let these guys wriggle off the hook entirely, I think the same thing will just continue to happen again and again. I mean, it may seem mundane, but an example of that is the report we got today when we walked in. Mr. Buettner, how did we happen to not get it 5 o'clock yesterday, not get it even a couple hours before council, so we actually could have had a chance to read it? Because I would like to have the city controller and her consultants come up and give their response, but like me, I'm sure they haven't been able to read it and listen to the discussion at the same time. So who was responsible for that exact timing so we could have it but not read it?
Councilman, I was. The report was not submitted until it was complete, until I'd signed off. I would have been delighted to call you last night at 11:30 if you'd like to be part of the conference call where we discussed it. As I said, I was not part of the discussions. I did not work at the department. The people who prepared this report had been working to reduce our costs and prepare our strategic plan, which we've shared with you. Hopefully you've had a chance to digest that as well. As soon as this report was ready, we shared it with you, which was this morning. We'd be delighted to answer any questions you have. To the extent this council wishes, I'm sure you could have the controller or any of her advisors come back and talk about this more if you wish. Again, I think the report speaks for itself. Be delighted to come back. I can answer questions. I hope we can move forward and go from here. But again, it was my responsibility for making sure this was done in a proper manner, and it wasn't until I had signed off that the report was issued to council.
Well, I don't know you personally. I mean, really, I don't know you from Adam, except in the position that you have. So I have no reason to believe credibility or not, but it seems so coincidental to me that this couldn't have somehow been done in time for us to actually even have a couple hours to read it. I don't know how many people in this room actually believe that to be true. Let me see if I can get at least one other question in. Unfortunately, this isn't a good format for the kind of questioning we would have liked to have had in Audits Committee, but again, no one was there for 2 different meetings. If fiduciarily you were so dependent on the 0.5 from the ECAF passing to continue to operate the DWP properly, who and why recommended to the DWP board not to accept the council's direction to take a 0.5, which was the money that the DWP actually needed to operate, and a 0.1, and actually reject that? On what basis did you make that decision, which I think honestly betrayed your fiduciary responsibility, because there was nothing additional that the DWP needed in the amount that the board had voted for with the 0.3 for the renewables? Who made that decision? How did it happen? And I'd also ask Mr. Alpert to address on what basis did the board decide to reject that 0.5 that the body actually needed? Mr. Freeman.
Well, again, I'm going to reiterate this to you, is that the determination that the board made is based upon the financial information and the data that had been given to us on a regular basis and continuing basis during various stages by the department and our finance people. The issue was, the question was the 0.5 and why we then rejected it.
The question is, you passed something that had the 0.5 but without the renewable money, which I don't believe anyone has said the DWP needed from a fiduciary basis. And then you rejected the 0.5, 0.1 that was sent back. Well, on what fiduciary basis was that done?
Well, I don't know that it was done on a fiduciary basis. You're going to have to ask our department finance people who made the recommendations to us that the subsequent proposal by the council was not sufficient. But it was my understanding from their discussions that when we looked at the 0.5, we had asked both the general manager and I believe the commission had asked to make certain that the increase would be the bare minimum, that could possibly we could have for the ratepayers. And that recommendation of 0.5 came to the commission from the department. And we approved.
Let the record show that I was in Israel at the time and did not know about this.
So
I just want to be clear on
my
that.
question is,
Let me finish. I can finish.
who actually made the decision to recommend it to the council? And what I'm still not clear on, from a fiduciary basis, the 0.5 was the same amount that the board wanted and we wanted. The only difference was a renewable program that had, as far as I understand it, nothing to do with the fiduciary needs of the DWP. So if it was so badly needed, how did you guys turn it down?
Well, subsequent to that time, my understanding was that the PA consulting report came out, and that the PA consulting report recommended a 0.8 as opposed to the 0.5 that the department had recommended, and that in reviewing the recommendations of the PA consulting report, which reached a 0.8, they made a determination that in fact PA consulting in their analysis had considered factors that our department financing people had not considered. They did balances and adjusted, and I can't give you the exact terminology, but they went back and looked at years of rate increases, costs of utilities, and then projected on a going forward basis that what the cost of utilities would be. And I would presume that when our financial people saw that report and recognized that report was different from them, and actually asked for a greater increase than our own department had recommended, that they then redid the numbers and came back and made a determination that the PA report was either more accurate or provided additional information. But you'll need to ask the financial people, because they are the ones that have made the recommendations to our department. But that's...
Let me ask this question one more time, a little clearer.
Sorry, if I can ask you to press your button again.
Could I just finish this one follow-up, because it's the missing question, which is, PA said you should do a 0.8. The proposal was a 0.5 and a 0.3 in a lockbox where it couldn't be of any help fiduciarily. So there was a vote between two proposals, each of which were providing a 0.5. The DWP board voted for one that didn't put as much in a lockbox, which couldn't help you anyway, and turned down the council's vote of a 0.5, 0.1. So smaller amount in the lockbox, no difference in the fiduciary impact. So on what basis, other than one presumes the mayor's office telling you not to vote for it because it didn't have the money he wanted for a pet project, and one which I like, so it's not, I'm not objecting to the project, but this lack of fiduciary responsibility in that vote makes no sense to me.
But with all due respect, Mr. Price, even though I wasn't here, I do remember the proposal, and it provided that the commission could take money out of the so-called lockbox if they needed it for their purposes. So it was relevant to the fiduciary responsibility. The question's fine, except it needs to be stated with a bit more accuracy.
That is accurate. It did provide that we would be able to use those funds if necessary, if we needed them, number one. And number two is, in direct answer to your question or your statement, Mr. Koretz, at no time did the mayor or anyone from his office direct this commissioner, or to my knowledge, any other commissioner, as to how to vote on any of those issues that came before him. And I will tell you this, those of you that have known me long enough would know that had that been the case, I would not be sitting here today. Because if I did not believe the information provided to us by our department, if I did not believe that we were doing the right thing and in our duty to the Department of Water and Power, and that someone would try and influence me or direct me to vote otherwise, whether it's the mayor or you, I would resign from the commission before I would vote in a way that I thought was detrimental to my duties and responsibilities to the commission and to the department. So I hope that puts to rest that issue or that implication that you raised. At no time did the mayor or anyone from the mayor's staff direct me or, to my knowledge, any other commissioner as to how to vote on this or any other item that has come before our board. And if that were to happen, you would see my resignation before you immediately. That is not why I undertook to do this for no dollars. That is not why the commissioners who serve, and we have an outstanding commission now that serve our commission in the city of Los Angeles at no compensation, do this. We do this because we care about our commission, we care about the department, we care about the city of Los Angeles. We continue to, and we will do that. So I hope that if that is the real issue that you or anyone was trying to get to, that it has been laid to rest, at least with respect to me and the commissioners, certainly that I know that serve on this fine commission. So we voted based upon what information was provided to us at the time that it was provided to us, that we thought was in the best interest of the Department of Water and Power and the ratepayers, period. That's really the end of my comment on that.
Thank you. We do have Mr. Coy and Mr. LaBonge. Ms. Perry has to leave, folks, so if it's all right with you, Mr. Coy and Mr. LaBonge, we have Ms. Perry. Just go real quick. Okay, Ms. Perry?
Yeah, Mr. Szabo's here. Mr. Szabo, can you just come on up here for a quick second? I just want to ask you a quick question. Mr. Garcetti and I came to the Department of Water and Power Commission to speak on the record, and we had the occasion just to go into the back room before the meeting and also after the commission took a break, and I know that I saw a number of staff people from your office there, and I just wondered what was your purpose there that day. I mean, if you could just share with all of us. You can face the mic, you don't have to face me.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, our purpose there?
Yeah, well, yeah, the day that Mr. Garcetti and I came up and spoke on the record, the commission hearing, and we went and said hello to the commissioners before the department's commission hearing and saw you and some of the staff people from your office there, and also you were still there during when they took a break to go back and reassess, and I just wanted you to be able to share with my colleagues what your purpose there was that day.
Well, Ms. Perry, this was obviously a issue of great significance to not just the department but the city, and obviously the mayor's top staff would have a responsibility to be covering those issues and to be present when these decisions are being made, and that's why we were there.
Okay, so who were you there with?
Well, you were there, Ms. Perry. You saw who was there. I mean, it was the mayor and the several members of the mayor's top staff were there.
Okay, but I'm just asking you.
I'm not going to get into the name.
Okay. All right, so you don't want to answer it. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. There you go. All right, this is what we've been dealing with. So thank you very much. And I just want to go ahead and note and file the action or lack of action that I took through my committee. And this causes me to just want to redouble my efforts, work very hard, get these structural changes in place so we don't ever have to do this dance again. I was there. I didn't draw any conclusions. I wanted to offer you an opportunity to say on the record for everyone who's here so that they can hear from you, not from me, because I don't think it's right to interpret what you may see, because I could be wrong. But that's fine. You make your decision, and that's okay. All right, so that's what I'm asking for today, is I'm ready to move on, Mr. President, and you can note and file what I did. Mr. Koretz has a separate committee. Obviously, the body will take a look at what he did and make its own decisions. But for me, again, I'm moving forward to March 2011 and the ballot and creating permanent structural change for this department.
Thank you very much. Mr. Krikorian.
Thank you, Mr. President. And yes, I agree that structural change is what's needed, and I agree with Mr. Smith that, I also have a great deal of respect for the professionals that are here with us today. But I don't think it indicates a lack of respect to ask questions in this body about what happened so that that can inform our decisions about how we make those structural institutional changes going forward. And in fact, I think the public is entitled to know how the DWP makes its decisions, has made its decisions, so that we can be better informed in how to improve that process. So there's been some discussion about the reason for having a power revenue transfer, and that it's in lieu of franchise fees, it's in lieu of taxes that would otherwise be paid by an investor-owned utility, and I think we've pretty much covered that. But I think it's important for the public really to fully understand that this is essentially the DWP's tax obligation to the city that owns the DWP and doesn't charge it taxes otherwise. And so when we talk about the creditworthiness of the DWP and so on, it's also true that many taxpayers right now are struggling, and it's not an excuse to not pay your taxes that you're having a little difficulty right now. So I think we need to do a better job of making sure that we budget for this in advance, and I want to ask a few questions about that, because it is the board's responsibility for either making or not making the declaration of surplus funds that's necessary as a prerequisite for the power revenue transfer. Is that right, Mr. Albert? Okay. So as of April 5th, when the letter came from the general manager to the controller, at that time the board had not made such a declaration. The board had not considered whether such a declaration should be made. The board had not agendized or had agendized for it whether or not the power revenue transfer should be completed or not completed. And that didn't happen until the May 4th board meeting, as we've established earlier, when in fact the power revenue transfer was approved. So if that's the case, how is it that after having made a representation to the Budget and Finance Committee that the power revenue transfer would be made on time, Mr. Freeman then on April 5th said, without having put it before the board yet, that the power revenue transfer would not be made? That's question number one. And if I may
but
also...
sir, I testified that I put it before the board on March 18th, and there's a transcript that says so. So please ask the question based on the facts.
Okay, well, Mr. Albert, I thought you said at great length earlier that was not considered by the board. The declaration of surplus was not discussed by the board until, in fact, the power revenue transfer was voted on May 4th. Is that not the case?
Yes, I said there was not an agendized item for which the board could vote on until that time.
All right. And you depend, don't you, on your staff to put that before you, to make the financial analysis. You're not going to go and make the financial analysis independently. It's the staff's obligation to bring that to you and put it before you. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
And we did.
Okay, so what are the standards by which the staff makes the determination to recommend or not to recommend to the board whether a declaration of surplus funds is appropriate? And what is the process for vetting that kind of a recommendation within the DWP staff? What assumptions are used to make that determination? And are any outside advisors consulted before that recommendation is made?
Good morning. There are two criteria in which the transfer is calculated. One is it should be a percentage of the revenue the preceding year, audited numbers.
A percentage of the prior fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay.
And the transfer amount should not reduce the retained earnings of the department, the power system, below 1/3 of the total indebtedness. And normally, the second criteria doesn't come into play. It's just the first one that we always look for.
Okay, but when and how is that declaration?
I'm sorry, Mr. Krikoyan, we're a couple minutes over. Mr. Wesson's next on the queue. If we can hit the button again.
Okay.
Mr. Wesson.
Question. Call a question.
Okay. Mr. Weston calls the question. Mr. City Attorney.
Question?
That means the City Attorney want to establish something before we take the vote on it, or right after we take the vote on it. So why don't we do that first? Is there an objection to calling the question? Okay, there's an objection, so this is a vote. There's two people on for the second time, so it's a 10-member vote. We can please open the roll. Close the roll and tabulate the vote.
8 ayes, 4 noes.
Okay. That does not prevail. We'll have Mr. Labange as our next speaker, and then Mr. Alarcon.
As we go forward, Mr. Buettner, what do you expect as far as your tenure in this role?
I'm debating about this afternoon, but absent no other alternative, I am going to go back to the office and continue to work.
Very good.
We continue to press on, as I noted in my opening remarks. We have Korn Ferry working with us intensively to find the right experienced executive to lead the department forward. We continue to do that. I hope that happens sooner rather than later.
But you project, that's almost August. Do you think this is going to happen by October, November, or?
It's difficult to project. I think my hope is by early fall that we have nominated and the mayor's in a position to put forward to this council the permanent general manager.
I just wanted to say, I do have a great fondness for this department, but I am hurt by when I say hurt, in the processes that have taken place. I need explanation on neighborhood councils and your relationship to neighborhood councils, because during public comment of previous times, people voiced that there was a neighborhood council PAC, if you will. I think it was the first in the city that was done several years ago, yet there was a bypass in this process. Does anyone can explain that?
I can't speak to that process. I can speak to that since I became general manager, I've met several times with the neighborhood councils, personally myself, as well as department staff. We shared with them our budget for the first time ever and answered questions. We shared with them our strategic plan for the first time ever and answered questions. So I think we have hopefully gone a ways towards establishing a framework for more communication with neighborhood councils.
Great. And Mr. Freeman, did you want to answer that question too?
No, sir. I wonder if there are any other questions of me. I'm embarrassingly late for a luncheon that I'd set a long time ago. Is there anyone that has any further questions of me?
I don't have any further
Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.
I just think it's something to avoid some things in the future as we look at it. The inclusion that is so important, the ability for people to come to your meetings, the ability of people to listen to what you have to say and engage. And I also want to say this too. I have a great belief in your government affairs operation, but you have to strengthen that too as well to give it extra people to focus throughout the city, because a lot of people are engaged in the city. And water and power now is on the top of many, many people's mind, just like the LAPD was before there was a long process of engaging. So I would ask that you give that more support. You have an excellent person who operates that right now, but I think that's extremely important for the neighborhoods, for the people who are engaged in this, because it's not an easy situation that people just understand, and especially now in the dynamics of where water comes from and the importance of water conservation and the importance of the challenges of the San Fernando Valley and the water basins, and the new issue of all water is recycled no matter where it is and through time, but having that process and all our power issues. So I just put that to your task. I wasn't able to vote for the rate increase because I did not like how you handled it. I do like to support water and power most of the time, but again, I could not support that because how you handled it. And that's not you, Mr. Buettner. It's people who are with or past the water and power now. But as we go forward, I think there's a great opportunity to link up and make a difference and continue to make the difference that water and power has for over 100 years. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Alarcon.
Council members, I think you know my position on the transfer. And on, Mr. Labange, let me say that I've never said we should stop cold turkey from the transfer, but I have said that we should wean ourselves off of the transfer because that reliance on the transfer, I think, pits the interests of the Department of Water and Power against the interests of providing services to the people of Los Angeles and city government. And it's coming, the hens are coming to roost. I mean, that is what is occurring today. So I do believe we have to wean ourselves off of this transfer. In fact, we're going in the opposite direction. 20 years ago, it was less than 4%. Then it increased in 2001, 2002 to 5% of the tax, and then in 2001 it was increased again to 7%. And additional transfers were added in between, in the years somewhere in between the decision to transfer 7%, there was an additional amount that was added. This year, we're at a full 8%. Okay, so we're charging a full 8% for this transfer. So, you know, when Mr. Smith presents his motion, I'll have a friendly amendment, and that is you want to tell the voters, you want to give the voters the full light of day, you want to let them make the decision, then my friendly amendment would say then let's let them decide whether they want to define the surplus in the previous June, which I don't know how you do after you take the transfer money and then you define an additional surplus the previous June. That's an accounting issue that I'd like to have clarified for me. But then also ask the voters if they think that money should come to the city coffers or whether they think it should go back to the ratepayers. And I know how that vote would go, and you do too, because we will never present that proposal to the voters, because to do so would be to undermine the transfer. And the transfer is the problem. And I'm not suggesting that we eliminate the transfer. I'm not even suggesting that there's some fair transfer price that would be equivalent to other utilities. All I'm saying is that we're going way too far. At this rate, in 20 years, we will be paying over $1 billion a year out of the ratepayers of Los Angeles. That's what you're doing. It doubled in the last 10 years. It will quadruple from 10 years ago in just 20 years. And so this is a tax taking. Mr. Krikorian, you're absolutely right. You said it's a tax. If it were defined as a tax in law, the ratepayers would get it back, because we never went to them to ask for them to increase their taxes. We just took it from them. And that's what's wrong with it. There's a way to do this right, but we have to go way back and start over again. And I think that this discussion has really, what is brought to light is the delicate balance that we are putting ourselves in when we continue to increase the transfer at the expense of the infrastructure of our Department of Water and Power providing essential service to the people of Los Angeles. It is a core issue, and you're shucking and jiving the public into thinking that you're taking care of them when in fact they're getting screwed.
Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd like to ask the city attorney to answer a question for us, because one of the audit's requests was to have them report back on whether the actions of deception taken by the DWP rise to that of a criminal activity.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, honorable council members. William Carter for the City Attorney's Office. And the question, I forget, Council, I didn't hear the whole.
It was whether what has taken place has risen to the level of a criminal activity in terms of the DWP's deception, and whether you were able to analyze that.
Well, as you are probably aware, pursuant to the city charter, we are the council to not only the council, the municipal corporation, but also the proprietary departments. And so certainly we do have an obligation to provide representation to all of those boards and departments and city agencies, as well as individuals in the management position, including those gentlemen in my near proximity. If we are to engage in any type of criminal investigation, that would be a conflict. That would be very difficult for the city attorney's office to overcome. unless there was some sort of waiver provided by the entity or the individuals. So in terms of actually engaging in a criminal investigation, we have not pursued any criminal investigation at this time. If we were aware of any particular criminal activity on the part of a city department or city management, that matter would be referred to an outside agency which could provide that type of investigation. So the short answer is we have not engaged in any criminal investigation because it would violate the charter and the state bar rules of professional responsibility.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a motion on the relevant portions of the audits and government efficiency reports. I'd request item number 6 that we get a report back from the DWP on any measures that will be taken into place to prevent this kind of a problem in the future. We'd also like a report back to audits to instruct the CLA and the CAO to report back on the possibility of removing bonding responsibility from the DWP and transferring it to the CAO, which is the agency that does bonding for most city departments and agencies, and investigate whether or not a charter change is actually needed for this. I think as Mr. Alpert noticed, they're relying on the info they get from the department, and we feel that info was not factually correct and, in fact, somewhat deceptive in this case. And I would also move that we note and file the remaining items in the audits report.
Thank you. Mr. Krikoyan?
Well, first let me just say, in response to some of Mr. Alarcon's presentation, I think it's an interesting policy discussion about the future of the power revenue transfer, and I think it's one that we should have, whether it's too much, whether we can wean off of it eventually. But that's really not the question that's before us today. The question that's before us today is whether or not the $70+ million that this city was depending upon, that we had budgeted for, that we had been assured would be transferred to the general fund in order to prevent a downgrade in the city's credit rating, in order to avoid layoffs of city employees, in order to avoid destruction of city services, whether or not that was properly withheld from the city's general fund and its taxpayers. And that's, I think, the question that's before us today. So, I think Ms. Perry was right. We are going in circles a little bit on trying to get some of the responses that we need. But let me just finish one last point that I want to get to, and that is this. On March 1st, before the Budget and Finance Committee, the DWP again reiterated that the additional $73.5 million of power revenue transfer would be made to the city's general fund. Now, in Mr. Freeman's letter of April 5th, the DWP claims that that statement was based on the assumption that the ECAF increases needed, as confirmed by the independent review by PA Consulting Group, would be approved. But as far as I know, that condition was never made as a part of the statement to the Budget and Finance Committee. That was never disclosed in any way to the council or the board, as far as I know, that the power revenue transfer would need to be conditioned on that ECAF increase. And I think most importantly, I can't understand why the DWP, and maybe Mr. Raj, if you participated in the drafting of this letter, maybe you can respond as to why the DWP would feel that it would be appropriate to assume that the board would vote 2 days after this letter was written for an ECAF adjustment, or why the council sometime after that would approve such an ECAF adjustment. How can the financial assumptions of the DWP be based upon decisions of policymakers that haven't yet been made? I guess that's the question that I have. Why would the DWP feel that it could make financial assumptions based on what the representatives of the people would do after the fact?
just like any other organization, council member, I think we have a financial plan, and when we had the financial plan laid out by our financial staff, it did take into account what we would assume would be normal business, and that was ECAF, which increased, which was again proposed by us, but came back with a council-approved third party with even a higher number. So.
But Mr. Raj, if I may, at the time that that letter was written, the Citizens Oversight Board that oversees the board had not yet voted on the ECAF increase. So how is it that you can make that assumption? And the council had not had that brought before it either.
The budget process and the financial plan that we forecast is a forecast. So every assumption that we made is based on a forecast that we had done the year before, and is subject to change. And so you're absolutely right. So, because of the ECAF not happening is what led to a lot of these other reactions. At the Budget and Finance Committee, I was not present, but the Chief Financial Officer at that time was present, and having heard the transcript, he did not specifically state ECAF, but he did say subject to other actions or considerations. So there was a caveat, and yes, at that point, there was definitely and had always been the desire of the department to make the transfer at that time. So he was not speaking wrongly. He was right. He didn't want to make the transfer. He was under the assumption we would do it, but it was based on certain factors.
Mr. Labange.
Members, I know the transfer is extremely important to all of us. I believe, and I don't know if anybody at this table knows, and I don't know if anybody from the CAO knows, but I believe over $2 billion has been transferred since 1999. Does anyone know that number? Who knows that number? Oh, Mr. Miller's here. Mr. Miller, just sit there so you could tell everybody. And do we know what the previous transfer, would we guess? I mean, in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s?
Well, I can't give you the exact number, but yeah, roughly $2 billion has been transferred probably since '99. Yeah.
I bet we would say this too in the last 100 years. And let's just say 2013 is the anniversary of the aqueduct, which brought water to the Pueblo. And 2000, so 100 years would be that period there. How much do you think DWP's contribute to the welfare of the city of Los Angeles?
I couldn't possibly give you a number sitting here.
Not a good number, but you would say well into the billions of dollars.
Many billions, certainly.
You know, on this issue here. Mr. Alarcon, I just want to say the transfer is extremely important, and it's extremely important for us to reinvest in the city. I don't want to see and I remember the fight where they tried to make a private enterprise out of DWP, and other people would swarm in. Municipal power was a thought of this region's history that they thought it was important. And it wasn't just Los Angeles. It was Glendale, Burbank, and Pasadena. It was Azusa. It was Anaheim. It was other cities throughout Southern California that said municipal power stands. And when the lights went out in 1999 and 2000, it was DWP that kept the state operating. This is something that's real important to look at as an importance to that. There's no question there needs to be more transparency on our activity, and you got to be able to come straight to the table every time and stand up for what you believe in. And I also believe, Mr. Koretz, I don't want to see the business enterprise that's important about DWP to be taken away from DWP. I want the oversight that's necessary. I do believe in and have come to believe in the importance of an independent oversight by a ratepayer's advocate or someone who would be selected to work in that area there. And I know there's city attorneys up there, right there, aren't there, Mr. Carter? And are there controllers up there from the controller's office? Maybe there needs to be more some strength for the controller's office. And if we can have a friendly request, Mr. Buettner, if you need to look at that so there's better communication. We shouldn't be here today talking this long about this issue. We should be talking about the water they want to have us stop using at our plants on the coastal area and the impact. And I want to help you fight for that because that's real important for us. We look at the future. This has been a robust discussion, as Mr. Rosendahl likes to use the term robust, but also a needed discussion that has to continue on the issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Alarcon, as the last speaker.
I wasn't going to speak again, but
couldn't resist.
I couldn't resist when Mr. Lavange mentioned that the City Council blocked the sale of DWP to Duke Power or Enron. It was me and Jackie Goldberg who let me finish, Mr. Lavange, because I believe at the time you worked for Mayor Reardon, who was proposing the sale. So I fought to block the sale to Enron, which went bust, and your boss was fighting to keep, to sell to Enron our municipal power. So I agree with you on how important DWP is. I'm drinking their water as I speak. But just as the transfer was found to be illegal on the water side, and we're going to take care of that, the same thing can occur on the power side, where we do not have to be so reliant. Again, I never said eliminate the transfer. I said we created an over-reliance on it. Why? Because we're avoiding making the tough decisions on the city side, the tough decisions to rein in our budget. That is why we rely on DWP's transfer, and that is the wrong position. And I think that the trend that you've seen recently with the economic downturn is indicative that I was correct when I sued the city on the transfer 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and I'm correct today, and I will be correct in 5 years when those who will be sitting in these seats will again be faced with more and more problems of providing power and water to our public in a quality, efficient way, or providing city services. We shouldn't have that challenge. They should be totally separate and run independently.
We now have Mr. Labange for the fourth
I
time.
may work for Mr. Reardon, and I love Mr. Reardon, but I didn't agree with everything Mr. Reardon said. But I appreciate that statement there, and I do believe that John Ferraro, who happened to be a great leader for this city for 35 years, was part of that strength that helped defeat that effort to sell what these people thought was so important to build. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How can you say that about John? He could come right down on you, Richard.
Was there a second for Mr. Koretz's motions to Mr. Rosendahl seconds? We have before us Ms. Perry and Mr. Koretz's motions. Let's take Mr. Koretz's first. Everybody clear about?
No, read it. I'm not clear.
Okay, it was to note and file everything besides you on the 6, 7. Those are two.
Mr. President, the recommendation is to note and file recommendations 1 through 5, 7, and 8 of the audit's report, and to approve recommendations 6 and 9.
Okay.
What's 6 and 9, Mr. Clerk?
Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
6 is to request the DWP to report back on any measures put into place or that will be put into place to prevent this kind of action in the future. And number 9 was instructing CLA and CAO to report back to council on a timeline to remove bonding responsibility from the DWP and transfer it to the CAO, the agency which does bonding for most city departments and agencies, and whether a charter change might be required to implement this.
Mr. Gretz?
We ask that those both report back to audits. Item 9 includes not just to remove the bonding responsibility, but to report back on the feasibility of doing so as well.
Okay. Mr. Labange?
Just for clarification, is the CAO going to report on the benefit of whether the bonding is removed, or is it just going to remove the bonding?
You want an analysis of that?
Yeah, I want an analysis.
Okay. Yep.
I'd like to ask there be an analysis to
Analysis of
stand
what-
at the table.
Okay.
Okay. Before we make a final decision.
All right.
Paul?
And Mr. Alarcon made a motion. Those are motions actually to amend motions that were introduced. So when they come back, you can make the amendment. You had a friendly amendment on Mr. Smith's? Oh, okay. All right. So that's for the future. Please open the roll on Mr. Koretz's motion. Close the roll and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
And on Ms. Perry's motion, please open the roll. Close the roll and tabulate the vote.
12 ayes.
Those two reports as amended are approved. Thank you very much. Now go to our general public comment. We have a Arnold Schwarzenegger here. Might not be the Arnold Schwarzenegger, but...
Good afternoon. Ich bin Herr Schwarzenegger, Governor of California. I want to start by commenting on the Mayor Villaraigosa. I hope you have a good recovery. I too have had many bike accidents in my day in filming movies like Terminator. I would also like to thank the City Council. As you know, I have a great history in my family. Mein Vater was an officer in Nazi Germany. And I praise the City of Los Angeles for carrying on the wonderful tradition of Nazi anti-Semitism by bringing Richard Wagner to LA Opera. I was very happy to see Der Ring des Nibelungen in the Opera of Los Angeles. And what is even better is that we laid off many music teachers in Los Angeles County. This is true music to my ear. I praise this. I want to advise you to follow the way that I have ruled the state of California. We are making California green. And when when we make plants, when you have a plant has to be trimmed. It has to be cut. We have to cut off the dead leaves. I have successfully cut off the dead leaves while I was governor of California. Firefighters, teachers, nurses, these are dead leaves. We do not need them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meg Whitman is next.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Meg Whitman, Republican candidate for governor, and it was worth the wait to hear that stirring speech from our esteemed Governor Schwarzenegger. Now, some of you may be thinking, why am I standing here? I haven't even voted in 20 years, not even for Ronald Reagan. But I'm a highly qualified person to offer you advice on how to deal with our fiscal crisis, because as you know, I successfully guided eBay through the dot-com crash. And with me, Los Angeles can make it through this economic crash, even if every other city is wiped off the face of the map, like Maywood, or Pomona, which is now considering to cancel their police force. So, I know we can do it, but we need a plan. And I have a favorite expression: if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. However, if that road has tolls, we could probably make some money. Now, in the book I've issued through my campaign, Building a New California, I've laid out that my #1 plan is creating and keeping jobs. Now, here's something that should hit home. 2/3 of the studio movies are now made outside of California. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what Los Angeles would be like without the entertainment industry? Where would we be? What terrible state would we be in had Hollywood not created Arnold Schwarzenegger? Now, my solution for a business-friendly environment is decentralization and deregulation. So I think if you guys can just simply ignore the disasters created by deregulation such as Enron, you'll see that it is a fantastic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Brown.
Hello, members of the council. I'm Jerry Brown. I'm running for state governor, and not to be confused with the geriatric Brown, which some of you may be familiar with. Look, I got a number of policies. I'm different from my competitors because I've got the brains and the skills and the knowledge and the know-how and the ability to know what to do if the occasion arises where I need to know what to do. So, look, California needs change. if you look at my record, if you look at the work we've done up in Oakland, in the city of Oakland, when I was the mayor there, we've done a fabulous job. We've really taken Oakland, in a sense, back to nature. We've taken it back to nature, de-urbanizing the area. We've got a lot less people. People are fleeing Oakland. I don't know where they're going. I don't know where the money's going. I don't know where the people's going. But look, I'm green. Jerry Brown is a green guy, and by green I mean brown. I mean brown as in the desert. I mean brown as in brownouts. I mean brown in every way that you can mean brown to vote for Jerry Brown. But look, we got one more thing to cover, because I'm not really a politician. I dropped out of politics. I'm more of you can think of me as kind of a merger between a polygon and a mortician. It sounds kind of strange, but I'll try to explain myself. We got a polygon has many sides. It sees things from many different sides and angles, and that's what I'll do. And a mortician, look, we got to be realistic. California's dead right now. It's a corpse. So what the mortician does is it puts the makeup on the corpse before it goes to the funeral. So what do you get when you put those things together? You get,
Mr. President, this isn't within the jurisdiction of the city.
You get a polygon plus a mortician.
Mr.
Is
Brown,
it a politician?
Mr. Brown, the
Or
city
is
attorney is opined that you're not addressing the council on an item before the city council.
Am I just
has
more
any
gone?
jurisdiction in. We appreciate the comedy, but it's not within the guidelines of the city council. Thank you.
Hope to see your endorsement.
I presume Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, just for a public comment, ladies and gentlemen, those that are watching, the state law, the Brown Act does not require people to give us their correct name. Obviously, these people were not giving us their correct name. Mr. LaRouche, you have been advised by the city attorney that you have to address a matter within the jurisdiction of the city.
Yes, certainly. Regrettably, Mr. LaRouche is not able to be here, as I'm sure you all regret. But I'll speak on behalf of his Political Action Committee. My name is Michael Steger, and hopefully you get a sense from your 2-hour-long discussion this morning and the presentations by the gubernatorial candidates that your fiscal crisis will not be solved by budget cuts. So I think there has to be a reexamination. Now, I addressed the City Council about 2 years ago on a question of home foreclosures, and many of you might have remember that. It had to do with the stimulus package of Mr. Paulson and President Bush, that which has been continued by President Obama. Now, if you really want to address this problem, and you don't want to kill your constituents, which you will with budget cuts, where eventually it'll be fire and police, as much as you might want to withhold from that. If you don't want to kill the people of Los Angeles, which you will by budget cuts, you have approximately, $400 million budget crisis in the city of Los Angeles, over $100 billion of states nationwide, a federal government making major cuts to services nationwide, including Medicaid. You have to go with the Glass-Steagall policy. You have to call for that now on a federal level. If you're going to address the budget cuts in Los Angeles that will kill your constituents, you must separate the financial houses of Wall Street from the commercial banking system and shut down those financial houses which are bankrupt, because too big to fail means they're failed, they should be gotten rid of, and you preserve the sanctity of the banking system, of the home mortgages, and of your citizens. That's a human system. It's a human policy. Anything else would be inhuman, like what we've seen from Governor Schwarzenegger. Thank you.
Thank you. Clara Schulman.
Hello, my name is Clara Schumann. I'm here to invite the entire City Council and the guests here to celebrate the 200th birthday of my husband, Robert Schumann. And in an age that produces too many accountants and lawyers, I would like to leave you, and not enough great thinkers, I'd like to leave you with the gift of ideas. You know, something Wagner and Liszt didn't really know anything about.
Ma'am, you have to address the council through the microphone, and please be on a topic that is in our jurisdiction.
Sure. Ready? And.
Chairman, you're violating council policy. Will the Sergeant at Arms please stop this demonstration? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please, you're disrupting the meeting. Call to the podium Fuselli, Musillo, Sperling. Fusula, Murillo, Sperling.
Good morning, council members. Well, on a lighter note, it is evident that the Los Angeles business community doesn't feel the support of the LA City. The rates and cost of doing business here in Los Angeles County are increasing while businesses and profits are decreasing. My name is Fabiola Murillo Sperling, and I'm here to represent Opus Network. It's a business consultancy firm based in Irvine, California, with affiliate offices in Downey and Los Angeles. We are here today to invite you to participate at our Helping 100 Businesses for 100 Days. It's a business accelerator workshop. This is a free 4-hour business workshop taking place on Thursday, August 19th from 5 to 9 p.m. at the Metropolitan Water District here in Los Angeles. This free workshop is followed by a 100-day training offered to those small businesses that sign up for this free program. The training consists of live classes and teleseminars equivalent to 13 weeks. Helping 100 Businesses for 100 Days has been successfully adopted by the City of Santa Ana Buena Park, and we are now asking the City of Los Angeles for the support and endorsement. We are able to provide this free workshop through partnerships with various banks and nonprofit organizations like Latino Coalition, Asian Business Women's Association, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and America Business Association. Helping 100 Businesses for 100 Days is a program designed to address changes and challenges leading to business failure. Since January 20th, 2010, we have been presenting this workshop to over 500 businesses. Our goal is to work with one city at a time, one district at a time, and with 100 businesses at a time. I hope you can join us on August 19th, and we invite your district and small business owners to take advantage of this free 100-day workshop. Thank you.
Jose Martinez, Jose M. Martinez, not in attendance. Freddie Coronel.
Hello, my name is Freddie Cornell, and I'm a representative of the Lyndon LaRouche Political Action Committee. And just to, as my friend Michael Steger had raised the issue, that indeed we do face a tremendous financial collapse. And this is something that could have been avoided if we heeded the warning that LaRouche had given a number of years ago, that in fact, under the present financial system of free trade and globalization, this is a kind of collapse that we would face. Not simply just a monetary collapse, but in fact a physical collapse. And as we're seeing from New Jersey all the way to California, layoffs of teachers, layoff of fire services, layoff of police officers, this is just the beginning. And frankly, the only leadership that could provide, and the only policy that could reorganize this entire crisis is a policy known as Glass-Steagall. And at the present moment, it's very clear that Obama and Larry Summers and others are completely opposed to regulating Wall Street, are completely opposed to ending the bailout policy. So at this moment, our Political Action Committee is leading a drive to support the policy of Glass-Steagall, to restore it. And there are various individuals throughout the country, whether they be political officials or just your average citizen, that supports it. Over 70% of the population supports restoring Glass-Steagall. So I'm here today to bring this matter to you, to make it clear that if you guys are willing to fight for the community, the best way of doing that is expressing real leadership, which would be by supporting Glass-Steagall. I say this with the hopes of, being able to sit down with some of the council members to discuss this matter further. We've put together a resolution which we would like for you to endorse, and to discuss this matter even further. Thank you.
In Van Nuys, Donna Pearman.
Thank you. Anyway, I was very mad about you put the number 16 and make me wait for All right, 2 hours. Anyway, Proposition H that was done by the City Council and Michael Wu put it on the ballot. It wasn't by the League of Women Voters, convincing the public to vote for it, saying there was going to be less corruption. So that's the one that's put it together with the judges' salary. So people, we need to get together the signatures and repeal Proposition H, and we can take care of the city council salary. Parcel taxes undermine Proposition 13. We need to supervent it. Vote no on all parcel taxes. Anyway, I see that city council gave up going to Van Nuys Chambers. Shows how they feel about the valley. It's supposed to come back July 1st. You don't care about the city employees. You want to privatize government. It won't be good. It won't. They won't be as dedicated. We'll grow into corruption. It will be all about profit, not about the people. It's not caring about the public. We need to have stable, good-paying jobs that helps the economy. We need to take back money from the Community Robbery Agency, the CRAs, the reason why our city is such a deficit. Our city is in deficit because the city council overspends on their pet projects. God sees you, City Council. He sees you when you hurt families, the city employees. God will punish you. I want to look at the salaries. I want to see the salaries and the benefits of the CRA. And anyway, and also I want to say the DWP got a favor than City Council. Now the elderly and the disabled will have to pay for the trash starting in August. We'll go up to 70% for everybody. Sock it the disabled and the elderly. That's, I guess, what you feel. People on Lifeline. It's not right of DWP. We need to, I guess that's it. We need to stop going after the city employees. We need to go after the big people, the big managers, and the city council. No salary for the city council like it used to be.
Thank you very much. Henry Marine is our next speaker. After that will be John Walsh.
Yes, I filed a claim on October 2nd, and since October 2nd, we've learned who failed to serve Laura Jake, help count for Laura Jake, and what we got here is a failure to communicate. Today, I had the fortune of talking to Mr. Serrano, and the people who were paid to serve our elected officials have not done so in to pay us. And what we're going to do is try to get more information to our elected officials so they can make wise and conscious decisions and forget their foolish pride. So let me just make a copy of we were discussing MOU 35, and you can see the difference between
Thank you, sir. Let's make sure that if you get that Sergeant Arms, we'll be happy to take that
for you. You can use the conceptual version of percentages and turn it into dollars and cents. Anybody want to take it? So that's all I got to say. Mr. Serrano's working on this right now. He'll probably give you some better information on this in the future.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it. John Walsh is our next speaker. After that is Leslie.
John Walsh, blogging at HollywoodHighlands.org. New post up today. 2 big falls over the weekend and 2 major operations. One was the mayor, Viragosa, and the other was Zsa Zsa Gabor. Now, Zsa Zsa Gabor was transparent. There are many questions concerning the mayor's accident, and we want to know. The accident occurred late Saturday afternoon. We didn't know about it for 24 hours until there was a posting on Sunday evening after the operation, after he went through a delicate operation. Now, Eric, you would have been the acting mayor when the mayor when Viragosa was under an operation. That's the rules. When were you told that the mayor had an accident? The whole city. But I'll tell you who was told that the mayor had an accident. He made a phone call after he went to the UCLA Med Center. And why did he go to the closer hospital, Cedars? Who decided what hospital he went to? What's the name of the cab driver? The first story that he put out was the cab driver escaped. That was Sunday. Monday, after Rick Orlov of the Daily News interviewed him, they changed the story. When did he find out that he was, when did we find out? And why did it take 24 hours like Chappaquiddick? Why? Was the mayor on his bike under the influence? How do we know? We have no idea. And incidentally, there is a West Bureau traffic investigation by Sergeant Muriel Petway. And incidentally, when Schwarzenegger had his bike accident, we found out immediately.
Thank you very much. I can't answer all your questions, Mr. Walsh, but I read about it in the morning on Sunday. It was in the LA Times on Sunday morning. And hold on, Mr. Walsh, and then I was informed when he did undergo his operation per city policy that I'd be the acting mayor for that period of time. A day later? No, before it happened. Our next speaker is Lesline. After that is Candido Maras.
There's a form Sunday. On Saturday when the accident happened.
Good morning. If City Council can give city tax subsidies amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars to housing developers such as CIM Group and AEG, for example, then deny a temporary rent freeze, this should serve as a wake-up call to each and every tenant in Los Angeles. For the past 10 years, property owners in LA have been laughing all the way to the bank. Using the housing boom, property owners colluded to set rates at levels above and beyond the average wage earner in Los Angeles and have violated Civil Code Section 1671 by including in rental agreements late fees in excess of 10%. I want to speak to the people and let them know that if you're paying late fees, it's illegal. And I think as part of the reform, we need to set the record straight and adjust the Los Angeles Municipal Code to reflect that. It's unfair that these businesses, the property management companies and the property owners, can do this and get away with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Candido Maras is our next speaker. After that is Dr. Clyde Williams.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, council members. Item 16, the DWP issue. The ratepayers in of this great city are going to have to decide, was this a dog and pony show or was this real true accountability? I agree with Councilman Greg Smith that we need to move forward, that we cannot live in the past. But when I look back at the past and remember some of the things that took place here back in 2005, when I remember then Mr. Ron Deaton was here and they were talking about a contract for the workers, and he went around and shook hands with the council members, and there was no representation of the people here. That was a very sad day. And I just hope that we will have the accountability. And what I do like, and for me personally, is I like the fact that I saw certain council people stand up and finally be the voice of the ratepayers in this great city. And I want to thank Ms. Perry, and I want to thank Mr. Corian, and Mr. Koretz, and Mr. Smith, and if I missed anybody, I apologize. The transfer, I think it is a necessary issue. But the fact remains, as long as we continue the waste and fraud and abuse at DWP, the people of this great city are going to continue to cry out. Why were we able to make the transfer in the past? Because we could live with the water rates and the power rates. But there's a hole over there. There's abuse, waste, and fraud. And I truly, truly believe, for the first time in my life, that we have the people on this council who are going to finally hold DWP accountable. Let's move forward. Let's try to help them fix the problems. 99.99% of the people at DWP are great people. They want to do one thing, is serve the great city. And I hope that we will help them achieve that. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the debate today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maras. Dr. Clyde Williams is our next speaker, then Arnold Sachs.
Good afternoon. Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. DWP. By the way, I am a DWP liaison and have been watching DWP for almost 2 years now. welcome aboard, because we've been done that way for a long time. However, it's consistent with other departments. Bureau of Sanitation, LA Fire Department. Today, they approved a fee increase in the LA Fire Department. Well, they don't know why, but, well, $23 doesn't really buy you much in the way of service from the LA Fire Department, which has an average of $150 an hour. Wow, that's rather impressive. However, it's consistent with other departments within the city. And in most cases, you can only get access if you have a controller's audit of the departments. I would highly recommend that the City Council direct the controller to do an audit of the Recreation and Parks Department and all of their leases and all of the concessions to show full compliance with all of the agreements within the Recreation and Parks Department. This is a very simple task, it would seem. It's all in the numbers. It's all in paperwork. However, it hasn't been done, needs to be done, because the Autry National Center has not complied with its land lease agreement, and there are potentials for a declaration of default. Thank you.
Mr. Sachs is our next speaker. After that, we'll go back to Valley and Ankar Patel.
DWP certainly seems to be the headliner today, and thank you for letting the public, or reopening public comment on that item. That being said, a 2-hour-long discussion, what action did the council take? The majority of it was receive and file. So you really led the charge on that. I didn't hear anybody mention a chance, an initiative, instead of a tax or a transfer. And Mr. Krikorian mentioned it was a tax, but it's a property tax. The transfer is in lieu of property tax payment. So why don't you agendize for the public to decide whether the DWP should actually pay its property tax or make a transfer? Or maybe you should agendize whether the public should also be able to pay their property tax or pay a transfer fee. That would work. Then you would be able to have an equal playing field for everybody. I also wonder, did anybody ask Mr. Freeman while he was here about the extra $20 million he mentioned, the city getting, if the city agreed to the ECAF? Did that ever come up? I mean, you did increase the ECAF, so maybe not as high as he wanted, but you did increase it, so we should be able to get a percentage of that $20 million that he said was available. Did any of the council members ask that? No, I don't think so. And I'd like to close. There was an item on last week's agenda Ms. Perry brought up as a last-minute special item. There was no opportunity for the public to speak. According to the Brown Act, you need to make those items available to the public. I asked the city attorney about it. He said I should put in less cars. My point is, if I want to hear a jackass bray, I'll watch reruns of Gunsmoke.
Thank you, Mr. Sachs. Ankar Patel is next in Van Nuys, and then Walter Bechtel back here in council chambers.
Hello, good afternoon. I appreciated your discussion today. It was actually, I'm happy to hear all of that stuff. But you had LaRouche, the Political Action Committee, come down today. That was entertaining at the very least. And another political action committee that I think you guys have become aware of is LA Clean Sweep, right? There's 7 seats up for election in March and May. March has a primary. LA Clean Sweep is a political action committee. Ron Kay and other people are on board with that. And this kind of dialogue will go a long way to your re-election, to us supporting you. And, right, when it comes to elections, we think about money, right? $500,000 is about the number that people are saying you need for a city council seat in Los Angeles. So let me ask this question to Councilman Alarcon. How much money are you getting in campaign contributions from the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, right? Because last election cycle, the IBW donated $1,700,000 to elected officials' campaigns, most of which went to Mayor Villaraigosa. I hope he heals well, but I don't think it will really matter in the kind of service he provides this great city, which could be better, and I hope we are working to make it better. Now here's the solution, right? Instead of this transfer, why doesn't the DWP pay for electricity for the libraries? We're shutting down libraries. Huge cost for these public services is electricity and power and water. Why don't instead of giving us $70 million to put in the general fund so Villaraigosa can go ride his bike, why don't we put it straight into the libraries? Pay the electricity for the libraries. So many people would volunteer for the libraries. Libraries don't need to shut down. People would volunteer to work there. I would volunteer to work there. And again, transferring money to the libraries or other important things would be good. And I did look up your salaries, Section 4, Chapter 12 in the city charter. Hard to read. Everything's been repealed. Please go on the American Legal and check that out, because I was trying to get a hold of that information, and it was a little bit difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. Walter Bechtel is our next speaker.
Good afternoon. I wanted to come back up and say something because one of the council members approached me and asked me, he agreed with me that there's a problem with people getting behind the wheel there and intentionally trying to murder people in their automobiles. And he said, well, what do we do about that? It's like, it's not your jurisdiction. And I thought about that, and I wanted to say, the problem is you don't understand when you keep making deals with these snidely people like SRO, who kicked us out of the Ford Hotel, and we all had our rents doubled, and they reduced our relocation benefits, and we're not even going to be allowed to come back there. When you keep making handshake deals with the devil, you don't understand. That's the same persons that are getting in their car, getting out there and running your daughter over. They're the same people getting out of the limo like they did on Saturday night and shooting your son. They're the same people that do this. I don't understand why you feel so happy and clever about getting away with something like what you did to us at the Ford Hotel, because these are the same people. They have their own agenda. They have their own mind. You can't use the tools of the devil to affect the will of God. These are the same people that do those kind of things, and you claim you can't find the person that murdered so and so. Well, it looks like to me that you know who did it, or you have a strong suspicion it was so-and-so's son-in-law, but you don't want to tell anybody about it because it began to look like you might be to blame for it, which, in my opinion, you are if you keep letting these people get away with that kind of stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Bechtel. That will close our general public comment. If we can go to items called special, please.
Item 5 was called special for Councilmember Labange.
Mr. Labange?
Technical amendment. I ask the CAO to go to the table, please, real quick. Small technical amendment. Members, this has all been circulated. This is list. I hope you and your staffs have been familiar with this. This is to move forward on our Proposition 40 funds for various projects in the city. We must be extremely skilled and focused in order to be able to achieve success. And I'd like to ask staff just to reiterate what they did in committee, the importance of moving forward in these projects. Small to rate, you'd hold for staff.
You want to take both these up together on Prop 45
both
and
together,
6?
please. Okay. I think it would be good. For us to achieve all these projects, we need to work with focus and determination. I don't know.
Go ahead, Susan.
And the one thing that I think is real important before staff makes comment is that on these items, these revised copies reflect these amendments that are being circulated. You also have been an attached copy, which you all should have been received, that lists the project by district.
Good afternoon. Susan Huntley from Recreation and Parks. Sure. Is that better? Okay. Susan Huntley from Recreation and Parks. I believe you've all been provided a spreadsheet which lists all of the active Proposition 40 funded projects. The projects are scheduled to liquidate in June of 2001, and the challenges, 2011, and the challenges that staff has right now is trying to complete those projects in a timely manner with limited resources. And we do have actions in place to try and facilitate an extension for these projects so that we don't lose or forfeit funding with the state. We're talking about approximately 44 projects that total approximately $60 million. The Department of Recreation and Parks, the Bureau of Engineering, as well as the Department of General Services are working together to diligently try and strategize completion of these projects, but we just wanted to make it known to council staff here that we do have some challenges with trying to complete these projects by the liquidation date of June of next calendar year.
Mr. Drucker, thank you, Ms. Huntley. Mr. Drucker for the Bureau of Engineering, any comment? Ms. Cardenas?
Neil Drucker, Bureau of Engineering. Just support Ms. Huntley's comments. The Bureau of Engineering also wants to thank the Departments of Recreation and Park and General Services for truly stepping up to the plate to help us get these projects done as quickly as possible. We have a tight deadline, and we're all working together as a team to get them done.
Right. Thank you. Ms. Cardenas?
Right. Maria Cardenas with the CAO's office. Recreation and Parks will be completing 20 of these projects. GSE will be completing 7. The Bureau of Engineering will be managing 12 projects. We should also note that there are about 6 or 7 projects that will not meet the liquidation deadlines. The project management team, Rec and Parks, Bureau of Engineering, and our office will be working with each of the affected council offices to put in a legislative remedy so that we can hopefully extend the deadlines for those projects. And we are working with Rec and Parks and Bureau of Engineering to consider 2 90-day hiring freeze that they need technical expertise in Rec and Parks to get these projects through.
Do I need to make a friendly amendment to that right now?
Good.
Recommendation, the 2 90 days hiring freeze for Recreation and Parks?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, that's the correct word.
And the hiring hall unfreeze.
And the hiring hall unfreeze. So explain that to Mr. Parks, because his eyes lit up over there on that.
Through the Managed Hiring Committee, we are recommending 2 positions be provided 90-day authority in the Department of Recreation and Parks. One is an accountant that we need in order to do all of the closeout packages to the state, and the other one is an electrical engineering position. And
Looking at that?
yes, we're looking into that, and it would be paid for with the grant funds. And the hiring hall positions in Rec and Parks would also be paid for with the grant funds.
As long as managed hiring is looking at it, that's fine. Oh, very good. And members, I just want to remind you, please, yourselves, your deputies, look at this. These projects, they said that a number of them may not get to the finish line because of the challenges of our work reorganization. So be focused on it and have your deputies watch it, because there's seats missing at the table that there need to be someone to help. Mr. Miller suggested and will commit to always overseeing this to try to make sure that every project gets done. We don't need another committee, but we need your attention and the attention of your deputies to know that these can be done, but they need to finesse it along and make sure that everyone's working towards their end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Labange. And with that, let's go ahead and take up 5 and 6, please. Madam Clerk, if you please open the roll,
Yes.
close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
Those are both approved. Next item called special, please.
Item 8 was called special for Councilmember Hahn, but I believe her questions have been answered, and there is an amending motion that has been circulated.
Okay. If there's no objection, we'll accept that as a friendly amendment. Let's go ahead as amended, and please open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
That is approved. Next item, please.
Mr. President, there has been a request to reconsider item 10 and have that matter continue to tomorrow's meeting.
Okay. Please open the roll in reconsideration of item 10. Close the roll and tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
And if there's no objection, we'll continue that until tomorrow. Next item, please.
Item 18, called special for cards.
All right. John Walsh, number 18. We had 2 cards for you. Was one of them supposed to be in a different number, Mr. Walsh? We also have you
for 18, 19, but that's 18, 20, and 23.
Okay, yeah, we got those 3 then.
Okay. John Walsh, HollywoodHighlands.org. There's a new post up today, HIGHLANDS. You want to email us? It's quite simple, HollywoodDems, DEMS, @gmail.com. 500,000 so far this year, this calendar year, visitors. Yes, domestic abuse is terrible. And we 100% agree with you. Great job you're doing on fighting domestic abuse. I'd just like to say, I hope it got it straight. On Saturday at UCLA, when he was in the emergency room, you didn't know it. And you didn't know the council president to 24
This is not on this
hours
item.
later.
I'm sorry, sir.
This has to do 24 hours later when he went in for the operation.
We can talk about it privately.
Change what I said.
Sorry, we can talk about it privately, but he had the operation on Sunday, and that's when I was informed, Mr. Walsh. All right, next. Thank you. If we can please open the roll, close the roll, and tabulate the vote.
11 ayes.
That is approved. Next item, number 20. Mr. Walsh, would you like to come back up? Item number 20. And then after that is Ankur Patel, who's in Van Nuys.
I accomplished what I wanted today. I'm going home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. So you waive on item 23 as well? Okay. Mr. Patel on item 20 in Van Nuys. Go ahead, sir.
Top Secret America, right? The Washington Post reporters, they did an extensive 2-year, they've been doing this for 2 years, tracing down Homeland Security and every other new organization that has been created since 9/11 and the security, right? And so this bill itself is about $69 million, $922,146. Almost the amount that the transfer is about, right? And you spent 2 hours on that. That's $70 million, different organization, but you know it's the same amount of money. And then again, we lose track of how much money we're dealing with. So this just plays into this whole report, and I just hope you guys pay attention. I hope you guys pay attention to this Top Secret America thing going on, and it's going to be an extensive research and study on all of the secrecy that is around governmental organizations in the municipalities, the counties, the state, the government, at the federal level, the international. There are so many secrets. We don't know what's going on. There's no way for me to know. And based on what Austin Buettner did today, right, he gave you the report a minute before or however long, right? That kind of secrecy is all a part of this.
Mr. President, I don't think he's talking about item 20 anymore. If you can come back to the USC grants, please.
Urban Area Security Initiative, right? Keeping secrets from the people. Keeping the people unaware of what's actually going on in the world. That's what this is about. And just like Austin Buettner is doing to you, this is going to continue to do to us. And so, just keep paying attention to the veils of secrecy that are all around us.
That will close our public comment on this item. Please prepare the roll and tabulate the vote.
10 ayes.
That is approved. Item 23, the card has been pulled. Mr. You want forthwith on that?
Just forthwith on 18.
Forthwith on 18 without objection. And if we can prepare the roll on 23 and tabulate the vote.
10 ayes.
That is approved. Next order of business.
Council has motions for posting and referral.
Those are posted and referred.
There are excuses on the desk. Councilmember Alarcon requests to be excused August 4th to arrive at 11 a.m. for city business. That meets council policy.
Mr. Alarcon's excused.
And Councilmember Zine requests to be excused August 20th for personal business. That also meets council policy.
Did he say what sort of personal business?
No, he did not.
Okay. You guys want to hold that on the desk for Mr. Zine, or should we approve it? All right. Well, we'll move it ahead this time. Next order of business.
That would clear the desk.
All right. Any announcements, colleagues? Mr. Parks?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just announce to the public that Bethel AME Church at 7900 Southwestern on Thursday, July 22nd, 2010, between 6:30 and 8 p.m. will be hosting a meeting for the public regarding the investigation and conclusion of the Grim Sleeper case. So they're hosting a community meeting in which the detectives will be present to discuss the issues that are public knowledge.
All righty. Any other announcements? If not, do we have any adjourning motions today?
You should come.
All right. If I can ask everybody to please rise in council chambers for our adjourning motions. And I'd like to recognize Ms. Hahn for our first. If I can ask everybody in chambers to please rise for our adjourning motions.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Please, Ms. Hahn, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like us to adjourn today in the memory of Bernard Valenzuela, who passed away July 14th. He was a longtime resident of the Wilmington community, very active in ILWU, member of Local 13. He's survived by his 2 children, Donald and Donna, 2 stepchildren, Sandra and Sharon, 13 grandchildren, 21 great-grandchildren, and many great-great-grandchildren. Services are being held today at Green Hills Memorial Park.
Thank you. Ms. Perry, did you have one? Or Mr. Parks? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd ask to be adjourned in memory of Ozzie Lee Borton, born in Savannah, Georgia, December 1934, graduate of Alfred Beach High School in Savannah, pursued her higher education, and eventually entered nursing school. She came to California in 1970, where she married Reverend James Borton. She has 3 children. She has a lifelong passion for studying the religious word. She was also an inspirational contribution to her church, the First Lady of Sunday School teacher, the Vacation Bible School teacher, also program director and facilitator of many functions at her husband's church. She's passed away recently, Wednesday, July 14th, at the age of 75. She leaves her husband and 3 children. Services were held in Inglewood Cemetery on West Florence last week.
Thank you. Ms. Perry?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have 3 brief adjourning motions. First, in memory of Joseph F. Brem, who succumbed to a brief but courageous battle with brain cancer at the age of 63. He was born on August 3, 1946, and was the son of Joseph and Mary Ann Brem. And he was a 1964 graduate of Appleton High School and attended Milwaukee's Leighton School of Art and the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He was employed by the Oneida Tribe of Indians of Wisconsin, and he was a man of many interests, including astronomy, technology, reading, music. And he is survived by his mother, Mary Ann, his siblings, Catherine, who was a constituent of the 9th District, Michael, Betty Parrish, Anna Anderson, Patty Hines, and many nieces and nephews, grandnieces and nephews, aunts, and he was preceded in death by his father and his brother, George. I'd also like to remember Sarah Edna Ray, who was 82 years old, born in 1928 in Treon, Georgia. She was the youngest of 4 girls, and she married Clarence Ely in 1951. And in 1953, they boarded a ship to Ethiopia to serve in capacity as an international foreign missionaries working in Africa, Asia, and South America, where they served for 37 years. She raised 6 children, and her main ministry was teaching. She taught at a women's Bible school, a national elementary school, and spent the last 10 years in Ethiopia at Bingham Academy in Addis Ababa. She loved children and loved teaching. The Elys retired and continued their ministry, where Sarah worked in the archives department in doing mission research, and she is survived by her loving husband, Clarence Ely, and her 6 children, Fred, Ellie, Becky, Marion, David, Steve, and Rick. You guys may know Dave Ely. Dave Ely does our work for the census every 10 years, and you see him on a somewhat regular basis working with the Chief Legislative Analyst's office, and this was his mother. So I think we should all sign
members on that. Yeah, thank you.
We should all sign on that. And I also appreciate your indulgence today in allowing me to step out for a second to Second Baptist Church to just remember the life of Dolores Sermons Nehemiah. And you may know Mrs. Nehemiah because she comes every African American History Month, and she always has an incredible outfit on, and she's always smiling with glasses on. She was the president in the past of our Author Study Club, the group that ensures that each year we have a really top-notch Black History Month celebration. She was a child of the Depression and passed away suddenly last week. She was born in 1930 in Somerville, New Jersey. She was a great champion of books and of teaching, not only through the spoken word, but through literature. She was a very articulate, very elegant woman who was always optimistic and was a role model to any number of people whose paths she crossed. She was a devoted woman of faith, and in her last year, she worked as an assistant to Bishop L. Daniel Williams during his tenure as president of the Baptist Ministers Conference, and in later years worshiped under the leadership of Dr. William S. Epps at Second Baptist Church. All I can say is that what they shared with us in the program, which was she never met a stranger. Her smile on her face was only surpassed by the twinkle in her eye. She was always amused by what people had to say and do, and she will surely be missed. She has a long list of sisters and nieces and nephews and people who will never forget her, including her extended community family. And Mr. Parks knew her very well, too. I just saw her, maybe a month ago, and I think she knew she was not well, would not be here long. And I asked her how she was doing, and she said, well, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here, but I'm going to keep busy till it's time for me to go.
I'd like to just comment. She just recently participated in our 8th annual book fair in Leimert Park, and in fact, she just recently attended a follow-up after-action meeting where she became ill and later was hospitalized. The other issue that she's been one of the local activists in the whole issue of the Haiti crisis. So she has spread herself thin in the sense of being involved with religious, cultural, and literary kinds of activities, but certainly an activist on the Haiti front in Los Angeles.
So, Mr. Parks and myself.
Thank you. We'll put both of you on that. No other adjourning motions, then Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll? And we'll next be in session tomorrow. That's July 21st, 2010, here in the John Farrow Council Chambers. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, and this meeting of the Los Angeles City Council is hereby adjourned. Have a great day.